A Roman emperor paid fortunes to read sheep intestines before every decision, yet somehow built the greatest empire in history. Tonight, discover why ancient fortune-telling methods were actually more accurate than you'd expect. Long before smartphones, weather apps, or stock market predictions, ancient humans faced the same burning question that keeps us awake at night: what happens tomorrow? The difference was life or death hung in the balance more often than our modern convenience-driven lives. Picture early tribes huddled around flickering fires, listening to every sound in the darkness. Was that rustling in the bushes a harmless animal, or a deadly predator? Would tomorrow bring rain for their crops, or a devastating drought? These weren't casual worries. Wrong guesses meant starvation, death, or watching your entire community disappear. Ancient people desperately wanted some kind of heads-up about the future. They couldn't just check a weather app or Google, "Will my crops survive this season?" Instead, they developed something far more fascinating and mysterious. They started connecting strange events to messages from the spirit world. When lightning struck twice in the same spot, it wasn't just bad luck. When birds flew in unusual patterns, it wasn't random behavior. These events became signals, warnings, or promises from forces beyond human understanding. Early humans began building elaborate systems around these observations, creating the first prediction methods our species ever knew. Here's where things get interesting. Shamans and tribal leaders quickly realized they could claim special connections to these spiritual messages. Why? Because having exclusive access to tomorrow's secrets meant having incredible power over everyone else. If you could read what the spirits wanted, you became indispensable to your community's survival. These early fortune tellers weren't just making wild guesses though. They were actually pretty smart about it. Shamans spent years studying natural patterns, animal behaviors, and seasonal changes. They memorized which weather signs usually preceded storms, which animal movements suggested migration patterns, and which plant behaviors indicated upcoming seasonal shifts. But they wrapped all this practical knowledge in spiritual mystery. Makes sense, right? People were more likely to listen to divine messages than farming tips from the guy next door. The supernatural packaging made predictions feel more powerful and trustworthy than simple observations. Predicting the future helped people feel safer in what was honestly a pretty terrifying world. When you're living without modern medicine, grocery stores, or reliable shelter, any glimpse of tomorrow's challenges could mean the difference between thriving and becoming extinct. Predictions gave ancient communities a sense of control over chaos. Well, here's where our ancestors got really creative with their observation skills. They started looking for patterns everywhere, in star movements across night skies, in the way animals behaved before weather changes, in unusual cloud formations, and even in the direction smoke drifted from their fires. Ancient astronomers noticed that certain star positions coincided with seasonal changes. Farmers realized that specific bird migration patterns predicted harsh winters. Hunters observed that animal behavior shifted before earthquakes or storms. These weren't superstitions. They were early forms of scientific observation wrapped in spiritual beliefs. Then there's the fascinating part about how different cultures developed completely different prediction systems while observing the same natural world. Some focused heavily on celestial movements, tracking planets and constellations with remarkable precision. Others concentrated on animal omens, believing that creatures possessed supernatural awareness of coming events. Weather patterns became particularly important prediction tools. Ancient peoples noticed that wind direction changes, unusual cloud colors, and temperature shifts often preceded major weather events. They couldn't explain the meteorological science behind these observations, but they could definitely use them for survival. And the weird part is how accurate some of these ancient prediction methods actually were. Modern scientists have discovered that many traditional weather forecasting techniques used by indigenous peoples contain genuine meteorological wisdom. Animals do behave differently before earthquakes. Atmospheric pressure changes do affect bird flight patterns. Ancient humans were picking up on real scientific phenomena without understanding the underlying mechanisms. Different regions developed their own specialized prediction focuses based on local survival needs. Coastal communities became experts at reading ocean and sky signs for fishing and sailing safety. Mountain peoples mastered avalanche and storm predictions. Desert dwellers perfected techniques for finding water and predicting sandstorms. But ancient prediction wasn't just about practical survival. It also served crucial psychological functions for communities facing constant uncertainty. Having someone who could supposedly glimpse tomorrow's challenges made people feel less helpless against nature's unpredictability. These early prediction systems laid the groundwork for everything that followed in human forecasting history. The basic human drive to know what's coming next never disappeared. It just evolved more sophisticated methods and tools. The most successful ancient predictors combined genuine observation skills with theatrical presentation and community psychology. They understood that people needed both practical guidance and emotional comfort when facing an uncertain future. What started as desperate survival techniques around ancient campfires eventually grew into elaborate systems of divination, prophecy, and fortune-telling that would shape human civilization for thousands of years. But some of the most sophisticated prediction methods were already being developed in ancient China, where people discovered they could literally crack open the future using animal bones. Ancient shamans and tribal leaders made bold claims about seeing tomorrow, but they left behind no hard evidence. Their predictions vanished with the wind. The ancient Chinese, however, did something revolutionary. They carved their questions and answers directly into bone and turtle shells over 3,000 years ago. These oracle bones represent humanity's first recorded attempts at systematic fortune-telling. Picture this process. A king or noble would approach a specially trained diviner with a burning question. Should we attack the neighboring tribe? Will the harvest be good this year? Is my sick child going to recover? The diviner would carefully prepare an animal shoulder blade or turtle shell, cleaning it and smoothing the surface until it was perfect. Then came the dramatic moment. The diviner would carve the question directly into the bone using sharp bronze tools. The characters were tiny but precise. After that, they would apply intense heat to specific spots on the bone, usually by pressing red-hot metal rods against the surface. The sudden temperature change caused the bone to crack in unpredictable patterns. Here's where it gets fascinating. The cracks weren't random scratches to these ancient fortune tellers. Each line, each split, each tiny fracture supposedly contained a message from the ancestors. Long straight cracks might mean yes to a military campaign. Curved or broken lines could spell disaster. Multiple cracks radiating from one point. That usually meant the spirits were angry and needed appeasing. But the Chinese didn't stop there. After interpreting the cracks, they would carve the answer right next to the original question on the same bone. Sometimes they even came back later to record whether the prediction actually came true. Talk about keeping receipts. This created an incredible historical record that archaeologists are still studying today. Kings relied on these bone oracles for massive decisions. The Shang dynasty rulers, who controlled much of ancient China, consulted oracle bones before declaring war, choosing marriage partners for their children, and even deciding when to plant crops. Royal diviners held enormous power because their interpretations could literally change the fate of entire kingdoms. The questions carved into these bones reveal just how anxious ancient rulers were about the future. They asked about everything from toothaches to typhoons. Will the enemy attack from the east or west? Should the king travel this month? Will the queen give birth to a son? Is this drought a punishment from the gods? The variety shows that no decision, big or small, was made without consulting the ancestors. What makes oracle bones truly special is their authenticity. Unlike later fortune-telling methods that rely on verbal traditions or stories passed down through generations, these bones provide physical proof of humanity's earliest prediction obsession. When archaeologists first discovered them in the late 1800s, many were being ground up and sold as dragon bones in traditional Chinese medicine. Scholars quickly realized they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. The bones also reveal surprising details about daily life in ancient China. We know what diseases worried people most, which enemies posed the greatest threats, and even what the weather was like thousands of years ago. Some bones contain weather predictions that turned out remarkably accurate, suggesting these ancient forecasters understood seasonal patterns better than we might expect. Let's not forget the social dynamics at play here. Oracle bone divination wasn't available to everyone. Only royalty and the wealthy elite could afford such elaborate fortune-telling sessions. Common people had to make do with simpler methods, or rely on whatever information filtered down from the palace. This created a clear hierarchy, where access to the future became another symbol of power and status. The technical skill required was enormous. Diviners trained for years to master the art of reading cracks. They developed complex systems for categorizing different types of fractures, and maintained detailed records of which patterns historically proved accurate. Some bones show evidence of practice sessions, with trial questions and test cracks that were later scraped away. Modern scholars have discovered thousands of these oracle bones, and new ones surface regularly at archaeological sites across China. Each discovery adds more pieces to the puzzle of how our ancestors tried to peek behind tomorrow's curtain. The sophistication of the system suggests that systematic prediction methods developed much earlier than previously thought. The weird part is how seriously everyone took this process. Kings postponed major military campaigns because turtle shell cracks looked unfavorable. Entire harvests were planted according to schedules determined by heated animal bones. Royal marriages were arranged or cancelled based on fracture patterns that modern eyes would consider completely random. Oracle bones represent more than just ancient superstition, though. They show humanity's first serious attempt to create a reliable, repeatable system for prediction. The Chinese were essentially trying to turn fortune-telling into a science, complete with written records, standardized procedures, and quality control measures. These cracked bones and shells were just the beginning. Other ancient civilizations were developing their own elaborate systems for reading tomorrow's secrets, each convinced they had discovered the ultimate method for seeing beyond today. Ancient Mesopotamians turned paranoia into an art form, while other civilizations were still figuring out basic farming. The Sumerians were busy creating the world's most elaborate prediction system based on literally everything that seemed even slightly unusual. Picture this: you're a Sumerian farmer around 3000 BC, and your sheep gives birth to a lamb with an extra leg. Instead of thinking, well, that's weird, you'd rush straight to the local omen interpreter, because that mutant lamb obviously meant something terrible was about to happen to your village. Makes sense, right? The Sumerians wrote down thousands upon thousands of these if this then that predictions on clay tablets. We're talking about an obsessive level of record keeping that would make modern bureaucrats jealous. If a dog walked into a temple, they wrote it down. If someone's hair grew in a strange pattern, they wrote it down. If a bird pooped on the king's chariot, you bet they wrote that down too. But here's where it gets really interesting. These weren't just random superstitions scribbled by bored scribes. The Mesopotamians developed an entire professional class of omen readers who took this stuff seriously. These guys spent years studying pattern books that connected bizarre events to future outcomes. They had detailed manuals explaining how a two-headed calf related to military defeats, or how the color of a sunrise predicted the price of barley next season. The liver was their absolute favorite prediction tool. Babylonian priests would sacrifice a sheep, yank out its liver, and examine every bump, discoloration, and weird texture like they were reading tomorrow's newspaper. They even made bronze model livers with detailed maps showing which spots meant war, which meant prosperity, and which meant the gods were having a bad day. And the weird part is, they kept incredibly detailed records of their predictions and whether they came true. Archaeologists have found tablets that essentially functioned as ancient prediction scorecards. The Babylonians genuinely believed that if they collected enough data about strange events, they'd crack the code of the future. Dreams were another goldmine for Mesopotamian fortune tellers. They developed dream interpretation into a sophisticated science, complete with reference books that listed common dream symbols and their meanings. Dreaming about fish, that meant abundance was coming. Dreaming about falling, better prepare for political upheaval. They treated dream analysis like we treat weather forecasting today. Let's not forget the astronomical angle. Mesopotamians were among the first to connect movements in the sky with events on Earth. They tracked planets, mapped star patterns, and recorded eclipses with mathematical precision that wouldn't be matched for centuries. When Mars appeared unusually bright, they knew it meant something significant was brewing in the world of war and politics. The really fascinating thing is how deeply this omen culture penetrated Mesopotamian society. Kings wouldn't make major decisions without consulting omen readers. First, military campaigns were planned around favorable signs. Even ordinary citizens would check the omens before getting married, starting a business, or taking a long journey. Professional omen interpreters became some of the most influential people in Mesopotamian society. They had the king's ear, controlled access to divine knowledge, and could literally change the course of history with their interpretations. These weren't street corner fortune tellers. They were highly educated scholars who studied for decades to master their craft. But here's what made Mesopotamian prediction different from earlier methods. They systematized everything. Instead of relying on individual shamans with mystical insights, they created standardized reference books that any trained priest could use. If a particular type of birth defect appeared in livestock, you could look it up in the manual and find the standard interpretation. They essentially tried to turn prediction into a repeatable science. The scale of their omen collection is mind-boggling. Archaeologists have uncovered libraries containing tens of thousands of omen tablets covering everything from household accidents to cosmic events. They catalogued unusual animal behavior, strange weather patterns, weird dreams, bizarre births, and astronomical anomalies with obsessive dedication. What's really striking is how confident they were in their system. Mesopotamian omen readers didn't hedge their bets or speak in vague riddles like some later oracles. They made specific, detailed predictions about dates, locations, and outcomes. When they said a particular omen meant the enemy would attack from the north within 30 days, they meant exactly that. This approach to prediction would influence cultures across the ancient world. The detailed record-keeping, the systematic cataloging of unusual events, and the professional class of interpreters all became standard features of prediction systems from Egypt to China. But even with all their meticulous documentation and professional expertise, Mesopotamian omen readers faced the same fundamental challenge that would plague fortune tellers for millennia. The future remained stubbornly unpredictable. Their elaborate system of connecting strange events to future outcomes was about to meet some serious competition from a completely different approach to glimpsing tomorrow. Dreams were serious business in ancient Egypt. While other civilizations cracked bones or studied bird flights, Egyptians believed their gods delivered messages through sleep. The pharaohs didn't just wake up and wonder what that strange nightmare meant. They had professionals for that. Egyptian dream interpreters weren't your typical fortune tellers working street corners. These were educated court officials who studied detailed dream books filled with symbols and meanings passed down through generations. One of the oldest surviving dream books dates back over 3,000 years, written on papyrus and stored like precious treasure. Makes sense, right? When you're running an empire, you want the gods on your side. The dream book format was surprisingly organized. Dreams got divided into two categories: good ones that promised fortune and bad ones that warned of trouble ahead. If you dreamed about drinking beer, congratulations, prosperity was coming your way. But dreaming about your face in a mirror, that meant someone was plotting against you. The Egyptians took these interpretations so seriously that pharaohs would change military campaigns based on what they saw while sleeping. Then there's the story of how dreams shaped royal decisions. Pharaoh Thutmose IV claimed he fell asleep near the Great Sphinx and dreamed the monument asked him to clear away the sand covering its body. The dream promised that if he did this favor, he'd become pharaoh. Well, he cleared the sand and did become ruler. Coincidence? The Egyptians didn't think so. Dream interpretation wasn't just for royalty though. Regular people also consulted these books, though they probably couldn't afford the fancy court interpreters. Merchants wanted to know if their next trade journey would succeed. Farmers needed reassurance about upcoming harvests. Even simple dreams carried weight. Dreaming about bread meant abundance, while dreaming about your teeth falling out predicted the death of a relative. But here's where it gets weird. Egyptians didn't just interpret dreams passively. They actively tried to receive prophetic dreams by sleeping in temples dedicated to specific gods. This practice, called incubation, involved elaborate rituals. People would fast, pray, make offerings, then sleep on temple grounds hoping for divine visions. Temple priests often helped interpret whatever dreams resulted from these overnight stays. The god Imhotep was particularly popular for dream incubation. People traveled hundreds of miles to sleep in his temples, seeking dreams about healing or future events. Sick individuals especially flocked to these sites, believing dreams would reveal cures for their ailments. The temples basically functioned as ancient hospitals where treatment came through divine dreams rather than medicine. Egyptian dream books also reveal fascinating cultural details. Many dream symbols reflected daily Egyptian life. Crocodiles, the Nile River, papyrus plants, and specific foods all carried meaning. Dreaming about crocodiles usually meant enemies were approaching, while dreams about the Nile flooding predicted either prosperity or disaster depending on the flood's size. These weren't random symbols, they connected directly to real Egyptian experiences. What's remarkable is how systematic Egyptian dream interpretation became. Unlike other ancient prediction methods that relied on priests' personal intuition, dream books provided standardized meanings anyone could reference. This democratized fortune-telling in ways previous civilizations hadn't achieved. You didn't need special training to look up what your dream about fish swimming upstream meant. The book told you it predicted good news from the south. The accuracy of these predictions didn't seem to bother anyone when they failed. Like most ancient forecasting methods, Egyptian dream interpretation worked on confirmation bias. People remembered the hits and forgot the misses. Plus, many dream meanings were vague enough to apply to multiple situations. Predicting change coming soon covers a lot of possibilities. Egyptian dream interpretation also influenced neighboring cultures. Greeks and Romans adopted similar practices, though they added their own twists. The basic concept that gods communicate through dreams spread throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Even early Christianity incorporated dream prophecy, with biblical figures receiving divine messages while sleeping. The sophistication of Egyptian dream books impresses modern scholars. These weren't simple lists of symbols but complex interpretive systems that considered context, timing, and the dreamer's social status. A dream about lions meant different things for pharaohs versus common citizens. The books acknowledged that interpretation required nuance, not just memorization. Some Egyptian dream interpretations seemed surprisingly modern. Dreams about flying often predicted successful journeys, while dreams about being chased suggested avoiding certain people or situations. Water dreams connected to emotional states or life changes. These interpretations wouldn't seem out of place in contemporary dream analysis books. Egyptian dream prediction represents humanity's first systematic attempt to find meaning in the unconscious mind. While we now understand dreams differently, their approach shows remarkable psychological insight. They recognized that sleep-time visions felt significant and developed organized ways to extract guidance from them. But Egypt wasn't the only civilization looking skyward for answers about tomorrow. While Egyptians focused on dreams, other ancient cultures were mapping the stars themselves, creating prediction systems that would influence human thinking for thousands of years. The Babylonians weren't content with just cracking bones or reading sheep entrails. Around 2400 BC, they looked up at the night sky and decided the stars held bigger secrets. These ancient astronomers spent decades mapping every dot of light they could see, creating the world's first comprehensive star charts. But here's what makes this fascinating. They weren't doing it for romantic horoscopes or personal fortune-telling. They wanted to predict floods, harvests, and when their enemies might attack. Think about the dedication required. Night after night, Babylonian priests climbed ziggurats with crude instruments, tracking planets as they wandered across the heavens. They called planets wandering stars because unlike fixed stars, these bright objects moved in predictable patterns. Mars took roughly 2 years to complete its cycle. Venus appeared as both morning and evening star. Jupiter's stately 12-year journey became a cosmic calendar. The breakthrough came when they connected planetary movements to earthly events. When Mars appeared in a certain constellation, wars often followed. When Venus rose at dawn during specific months, crops flourished or failed. The Babylonians weren't being superstitious, they were being practical. Their records showed genuine correlations, even if they didn't understand the underlying causes. But astrology's real power lay in its complexity. Unlike simple omens that anyone could interpret, reading star charts required years of training. This created a new class of professional predictors who commanded respect and hefty fees. Kings paid fortunes for detailed horoscopes. Birth charts became state secrets, locked away to prevent enemies from exploiting royal weaknesses. The system worked because it gave specific, actionable advice. Instead of vague warnings like beware of danger, astrologers provided precise timing. Attack your enemies when Mars enters the house of war, but wait until the new moon. Military campaigns were planned around favorable planetary alignments. Coronations, weddings, and peace treaties all required astrological approval. Then something remarkable happened. Greek merchants and scholars encountered Babylonian astrology during trade missions and conquests. They immediately recognized its potential but wanted to understand the mathematics behind it. Greeks excelled at geometry and loved systematic thinking, so they refined Babylonian star charts into elegant geometric models. They calculated planetary cycles with stunning accuracy and developed the concept of houses, 12 sections of sky that governed different aspects of life. The Greeks also democratized astrology. While Babylonians focused on kings and kingdoms, Greeks created personal horoscopes for ordinary citizens. Birth charts became accessible to merchants, soldiers, and craftsmen. Alexandria emerged as astrology's new capital, where Egyptian wisdom, Babylonian observations, and Greek mathematics merged into something unprecedented. Roman conquest spread this hybrid astrology across the Mediterranean world. Roman generals consulted astrologers before major battles. The Emperor Augustus made his birth chart public to demonstrate divine favor, while later emperors like Tiberius relied so heavily on astrologers that they practically ran the empire. Roman astrology became incredibly detailed, with elaborate rules for interpreting planetary aspects and house positions. Egyptian priests added their own innovations, particularly the concept of decans, 10-degree segments of the zodiac that provided even more precise timing. They created detailed calendars showing lucky and unlucky days based on stellar positions. Egyptian astrology emphasized the soul's journey through different incarnations, with birth charts revealing karmic lessons from past lives. The strange part is how accurate some predictions actually were. Ancient astrologers successfully predicted eclipses centuries in advance. They identified optimal planting seasons and warned of likely droughts. Modern analysis shows their flood predictions for rivers like the Nile were remarkably reliable. They weren't just making lucky guesses, they were observing real patterns. but astrology's greatest achievement was psychological. In a world full of random disasters and unpredictable violence, star charts provided comfort through the illusion of cosmic order. People felt less helpless when they believed celestial forces controlled their destinies. Bad luck became bearable if blamed on malevolent planetary alignments rather than personal failures. Different cultures developed distinct astrological flavors. Persian astrology emphasized fire temples and religious purification. Indian astrology incorporated complex mathematical calculations and multiple chart systems. Chinese astrology focused on animal signs and elemental cycles rather than zodiacal houses. By 100 AD, professional astrologers operated in every major city from Britain to India. They published almanacs, taught students and competed for wealthy patrons. Some became incredibly rich, building elaborate observatories and libraries. Others were imprisoned or executed when their predictions proved disastrously wrong. The profession carried both tremendous opportunities and serious risks. Roman law actually regulated astrology, banning certain types of predictions while allowing others. Forecasting the emperor's death carried a death sentence, but predicting weather or crop yields was perfectly legal. This created a thriving underground market for forbidden political astrology. While astrologers gazed at distant stars, other ancient cultures developed completely different prediction methods. In Greece, something even more dramatic was taking shape: sacred temples where mysterious voices claimed to speak directly for the gods themselves. Deep in the mountains of ancient Greece, beneath the shadow of Mount Parnassus, stood humanity's most famous prediction center. The oracle at Delphi wasn't just another fortune teller working the marketplace. This was the real deal, a sacred temple where gods supposedly whispered secrets about tomorrow through a chosen priestess called the Pythia. Here's where things get interesting. People didn't just stroll up for casual advice about their love life. We're talking about kings, generals and city-states sending official delegations hundreds of miles on foot, carrying gold and precious offerings, all to ask one burning question: what should we do next? The process was theatrical, to put it mildly. Visitors had to purify themselves in sacred springs, pay hefty fees, and wait for the right day. The Pythia would descend into the temple's inner chamber, where sweet-smelling vapors rose from cracks in the earth. Modern scientists think these might have been natural gas emissions that put her in a trance-like state. She'd sit on a three-legged stool, breathing these mysterious fumes, and eventually start babbling what sounded like divine gibberish. But here's the clever part. Priests stood nearby, ready to interpret her mumblings into proper prophecies. These weren't random holy men either. They were educated, politically savvy, and surprisingly well-informed about current events across the Greek world. Think of them as ancient spin doctors with religious credentials. The oracle's answers became legendary for their maddening vagueness. When King Croesus asked whether he should attack Persia, the oracle replied that if he crossed the river, a great empire would fall. Croesus marched to war, confident in victory. The great empire that fell, his own. The oracle wasn't wrong, just brilliantly ambiguous. Then there's the famous case of the Athenians facing Persian invasion. The oracle cryptically mentioned wooden walls saving the city. Some thought it meant the old wooden fortifications around the Acropolis. Others argued it referred to ships. The naval interpretation won, leading to the decisive victory at Salamis. Lucky guess? Strategic wisdom? The debate continues. What made Delphi so powerful wasn't just religious authority, it was information. Pilgrims arrived from across the Mediterranean, sharing news, gossip, and political intelligence. The priests absorbed everything, creating an ancient intelligence network that would make modern spy agencies jealous. They knew which cities were planning wars, where famines threatened, and which rulers faced rebellion. The oracle's influence on major decisions was staggering. No Greek colony was founded without consulting Delphi first. Military campaigns waited for divine approval. Even the location of new temples required oracular blessing. The priests essentially held veto power over Greek expansion and warfare for centuries. But the real genius was in the delivery method. Oracles never gave simple yes or no answers. Instead, they offered riddles, metaphors, and conditional statements that could be interpreted multiple ways. If the prediction seemed wrong, believers could always claim they misunderstood the divine message. Brilliant defensive strategy, right? The oracle at Delphi wasn't alone either. Ancient Greece hosted dozens of oracles, each with specialized expertise. Some focused on healing, others on agricultural advice. Competition kept everyone sharp, and reputation meant everything in the prophecy business. Archaeological evidence suggests the site's prediction industry was incredibly organized. Inscriptions record thousands of questions and answers, fees collected, and offerings dedicated by grateful clients. This wasn't mystical improvisation, it was professional fortune-telling with centuries of institutional knowledge behind it. The oracle's political impact extended far beyond individual consultations. City-states used favorable oracles as propaganda tools, claiming divine support for their policies. Unfavorable predictions could destabilize governments or justify regime changes. Religious authority and political power intertwined so completely that separating them became impossible. What's fascinating is how the oracle adapted to changing times. During the Roman period, emperors consulted Delphi alongside traditional Greek clients. The priests carefully balanced local traditions with imperial expectations, proving their diplomatic skills matched their prophetic reputation. The decline came gradually. As Christianity spread and Roman power centralized, traditional oracles lost their monopoly on divine communication. The last recorded consultation at Delphi occurred in the 4th century AD, ending over 1,000 years of continuous operation. Modern visitors can still see Delphi's ruins, carved into the mountainside like ancient amphitheater seats facing eternity. The sacred vapors stopped rising long ago, but the stones remember when this remote temple shaped the destiny of civilizations through carefully crafted words and strategic ambiguity. The oracle's legacy lived on in ways its priests never imagined. The Romans, always practical about useful institutions, developed their own systematic approach to reading divine will, but they looked up at the sky instead of down into mysterious vapors. Romans loved their birds. Well, not as pets exactly. They watched them obsessively for signs about the future, turning everyday birdwatching into a sacred art that could decide the fate of empires. These weren't casual observers either. They had official priests called augurs, whose entire job was staring at the sky, waiting for feathered messengers to reveal what tomorrow might bring. The augurs held incredible power in Roman society. Before any major decision, from declaring war to holding elections, someone had to check with the birds first. No kidding. Roman generals would literally delay battles if the local sparrows weren't cooperating. The augurs watched everything: which direction birds flew, how they flapped their wings, where they landed, even how they ate their food. Each detail supposedly carried divine meaning. Here's where it gets fascinating. The Romans divided the sky into invisible sections, like a giant invisible grid floating above their heads. The augurs would stand facing south, then observe which section of sky the birds appeared in. Eastern flights meant good fortune was coming. Western flights, not so much. Birds flying straight ahead suggested the gods approved of current plans. But if those same birds suddenly veered left or right, well, time to reconsider everything. The process wasn't random either. Romans kept meticulous records of augury results, building massive databases of bird behavior and corresponding outcomes. They documented which species gave the most reliable predictions. Eagles ranked highest, obviously. They were Jupiter's personal messengers. Vultures came next, followed by various smaller birds. Chickens, believe it or not, also made the list, though they were used differently than wild birds. Sacred chickens traveled with Roman armies everywhere. Before battles, priests would scatter grain and watch how eagerly the birds ate. Hungry chickens meant victory was assured. Chickens that ignored the food or ate reluctantly. Bad news for Roman troops. One famous story tells of a naval commander who got so frustrated with uncooperative chickens that he threw them overboard, declaring if they won't eat, let them drink. He lost the battle spectacularly. But wait, there's more to this feathered forecasting system. Romans distinguished between different types of bird omens. Olites were birds observed in flight. Their movement patterns held the most significance for military and political decisions. Ocernes were birds whose calls and songs carried meaning. Crows cawing from the right side meant one thing, from the left meant something completely different. The timing of their calls mattered too. Morning bird songs had different interpretations than evening ones. Political careers literally depended on bird behavior. Candidates for major offices needed favorable auguries before announcing their campaigns. Even after winning elections, new officials couldn't take office without proper bird approval. Some politicians waited weeks for the right omens to appear. Others, more cynically, might have found ways to encourage helpful bird behavior through strategic food placement or timing. The augural system became so embedded in Roman law that bad auspices could legally cancel government meetings, postpone trials, or invalidate election results. Clever politicians sometimes used unfavorable bird omens as excuses to delay votes they might lose. Sorry, the ravens were flying counterclockwise this morning, so we'll have to reschedule that tax increase discussion. Roman writers recorded hundreds of specific augural interpretations, If woodpeckers drummed on the left side of a tree, expect trouble from northern enemies. Geese flying in perfect formation indicated stable grain prices ahead. A single crow landing on a temple roof meant the gods were paying attention to current prayers. Multiple crows suggested divine irritation with recent human behavior. The weird part is how seriously everyone took this. Educated Romans, accomplished engineers who built incredible aqueducts and roads, would cancel major construction projects because some pigeons flew in an unhelpful pattern. Military commanders who understood complex battle tactics would retreat from strategic positions after witnessing unfavorable bird omens. Even Roman emperors couldn't escape the birds. Augustus supposedly consulted augurs before every major decision. Tiberius kept court augurs on permanent standby. The practice continued for centuries, outlasting multiple dynasties and surviving various political upheavals. Bird watching remained official Roman policy long after the empire's peak. Then there were the Avgarialni College, exclusive groups of priest augurs who controlled interpretation standards and trained new bird readers. Membership was prestigious and hereditary. These guys were basically the Supreme Court of bird interpretation, settling disputes about conflicting omens and establishing new precedents for unusual bird behavior. The Romans wrote incredibly detailed manuals explaining proper augural techniques. They specified exact prayer formulas, correct standing positions, appropriate clothing for bird observation, and seasonal variations in interpretation methods. Nothing was left to chance except, ironically, the actual birds. While Greeks had their mysterious oracles speaking in riddles, Romans preferred their omens flying overhead where everyone could witness them. This created a uniquely public form of prediction that shaped daily life across the empire. But even as Roman birdwatching reached sophisticated heights, other cultures were developing entirely different approaches to reading the future, including some practices that would make augural bird observation look almost tame by comparison. While the Greeks were busy asking riddles at their oracles, the Etruscans had developed something far more hands-on. They weren't content with watching birds fly around or interpreting cryptic messages from priests. No, they preferred to slice open animals and peer into their guts for answers about the future. Welcome to horospacey, the art of reading animal organs like a bloody crystal ball. The Etruscans, who lived in what we now call Italy, believed that the gods spoke through the internal organs of sacrificed animals. Livers were the star of this gory show. These ancient fortune-tellers thought the liver was basically a divine messaging system, complete with different sections that corresponded to different gods and future events. But here's where it gets really interesting. They weren't just making it up as they went along. The Etruscans created detailed bronze models of livers, complete with inscriptions showing exactly which bump, mark, or discoloration meant what. These weren't amateur guesswork sessions. This was a highly organized system with rules, training, and professional standards. Roman priests called horospacers took this practice and ran with it. They examined sheep livers before major battles, checked cattle organs before important political decisions, and scrutinized animal guts before religious ceremonies. The Romans were so serious about this that they had official horospacers attached to their armies and government positions. The process itself was elaborate. After sacrificing an animal, usually a sheep, goat, or bull, the horospace would carefully remove the liver and place it on a special table. They'd examine every ridge, every spot, every unusual marking. A healthy-looking liver with clear divisions meant the gods approved of whatever plan was being considered. Diseased areas, strange growths, or missing sections, bad news. Different parts of the liver represented different aspects of future events. The head of the liver related to friendly gods, while the tail connected to hostile ones. The right side indicated favorable outcomes. The left side warned of troubles ahead. Even tiny blemishes could derail major military campaigns or political appointments. What's fascinating is how seriously Roman leaders took these predictions. Julius Caesar reportedly ignored warnings from horospacers before crossing the Rubicon, but most commanders wouldn't dream of marching without getting good liver readings first. Emperors delayed important announcements, generals postponed battles, and politicians rescheduled votes based on what they found inside sacrificed animals. The training for becoming a horospace was intense. Students spent years learning to recognize hundreds of different signs and their meanings. They memorized which gods controlled which liver sections, studied the significance of various colors and textures, and practiced interpreting combinations of markings that appeared together. Then there were the bronze liver models used for teaching. The most famous one, found in Piacenza, Italy, is covered with the names of Etruscan gods and shows exactly how the liver was divided into different prophetic zones. It's like an ancient GPS system for navigating divine messages through animal organs. But the Romans didn't stop at livers. Haruspices also examined hearts, lungs, and other internal organs for additional clues about the future. They looked for unusual growths, checked organ positions, and noted any abnormalities that might indicate divine displeasure or approval. The weird part is how often these predictions seemed to work, at least according to Roman historians. Successful military campaigns were attributed to good liver readings, while defeats were blamed on ignoring bad omens found in animal guts. Whether the predictions actually worked or people just remembered the hits and forgot the misses remains an open question. Haruspice wasn't cheap entertainment. The animals used for sacrifice were valuable, and hiring a skilled haruspice cost serious money. Only wealthy individuals and government officials could afford regular consultations, making this a luxury service for the elite. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, haruspice faced increasing opposition. Church leaders condemned the practice as pagan superstition, and Christian emperors eventually banned public haruspice ceremonies. But the practice survived in private for centuries, with some Roman families continuing to consult haruspices well into the late Empire period. The Romans kept detailed records of haruspice sessions, documenting which readings preceded which events. These records show just how integrated organ reading had become in Roman decision-making processes, from everyday business deals to major state policies. What started as an Etruscan religious practice became a cornerstone of Roman political and military planning. Haruspices accompanied Roman legions across Europe, Africa, and Asia, carrying their bronze liver models and sacrificial knives to the far corners of the empire. While Romans were busy reading sheep livers and examining cattle hearts, medieval Europe was developing entirely different approaches to glimpsing the future. The age of traveling prophets and mystical visions was about to begin. Medieval Europe was a wild time for anyone claiming they could see tomorrow. Traveling prophets wandered from village to village, drawing crowds with tales of divine visions and supernatural messages. These weren't your garden variety fortune tellers reading palms at county fairs. No, these folks claimed direct hotlines to saints, angels, and sometimes God himself. Picture a dusty marketplace in 12th century France. A mysterious figure arrives, speaking of dreams that showed plague sweeping through neighboring kingdoms. Word spreads like wildfire. All within hours, half the town believes disaster is coming, while the other half thinks the stranger is completely mad. Medieval people lived on this knife's edge between hope and terror, never knowing which prophecy might actually come true. The most successful prophets had a knack for timing. They'd show up during harvest failures, political upheavals, or after strange weather patterns. "I saw this coming," they'd announce, pointing to recent troubles as proof of their divine connections. Smart move, really. Nothing builds credibility like appearing to predict something that already started happening. But here's where things get interesting. Many of these wandering prophets genuinely believed their own visions. They weren't all con artists looking for free meals and warm beds. Some experienced what they described as overwhelming spiritual encounters, dreams so vivid they felt more real than waking life. Others claimed to hear voices during prayer or meditation. Or whether these experiences came from divine sources, mental illness, or pure imagination didn't matter much to desperate audiences. Church authorities had mixed feelings about these freelance fortune tellers. On one hand, prophecy was biblical. Old Testament prophets were heroes after all. Saints had visions, angels delivered messages. The church couldn't exactly condemn the concept without undermining its own foundation. On the other hand, unauthorized prophets threatened official religious control. Who needed priests when some random traveler could deliver God's word directly? Or the solution: careful vetting. Church officials developed elaborate processes for testing prophetic claims. They'd interrogate would-be prophets about theological details, examine their moral character, and wait to see if predictions actually materialized. Or those who passed inspection might gain official blessing. Those who failed faced charges of heresy, fraud, or demonic possession. The stakes were literally life and death. Some prophecies focused on massive world-changing events. The end times were particularly popular. Medieval Christians expected Jesus to return any day, so predictions about final battles between good and evil drew huge audiences. Other prophets specialized in more practical concerns: when the next famine would strike, which kings would fall, whether this year's crops would survive. Then there were the regional specialists. Every area had its own concerns, and smart prophets tailored their messages accordingly. Coastal communities worried about storms and foreign invasions. Mountain villages feared harsh winters. Trading centers obsessed over economic upheaval. A successful prophet learned to read local anxieties and craft visions that addressed specific fears. The most famous medieval prophets became celebrities of sorts. Hildegard of Bingen experienced mystical visions that she recorded in elaborate manuscripts. Her predictions about political events and natural disasters spread across Europe, earning her correspondence with popes and emperors. Joachim of Fiore developed complex theories about historical cycles and future ages. His followers continued promoting his ideas centuries after his death, but celebrity status came with risks. Failed predictions could destroy reputations overnight. Worse, successful prophecies sometimes attracted unwanted attention from powerful people who didn't appreciate being warned about their upcoming downfalls. Many prophets learned to speak in riddles and symbols. Just like the ancient oracles, vague warnings were safer than specific accusations. Crowd psychology played a huge role in prophetic success. Medieval people lived in tight communities where rumors spread instantly. One person's panic could trigger mass hysteria within hours. Prophets who understood this dynamic could create self-fulfilling prophecies, predict a food shortage, watch people hoard grain, then point to empty markets as proof of divine insight. The weirdest part: some predictions genuinely seemed to come true. Wars did break out where prophets said they would. Plagues struck predicted regions. Natural disasters followed prophetic warnings. Whether this resulted from lucky guessing, careful observation of existing patterns, or something more mysterious remained hotly debated. Even skeptical observers had to admit that certain prophets maintained surprisingly accurate track records. Medieval record-keeping wasn't exactly scientific though. Successful predictions were carefully preserved and widely circulated. Failed prophecies got forgotten or explained away. The prophet was right, but people's prayers changed God's mind. This selective memory made evaluating prophetic accuracy nearly impossible. As the medieval period progressed, prophecy gradually became more organized and institutional, but the basic human hunger for glimpses of tomorrow never disappeared. People still craved those moments when someone claimed to know what was coming next, even if experience taught them to be skeptical. This appetite for prediction would soon find new outlets as Islamic scholars began revolutionizing the ancient art of astrology with mathematical precision. Medieval Europe had its prophets and fortune tellers, but across the Mediterranean, something far more sophisticated was brewing. While European peasants consulted traveling mystics about their harvests, Islamic scholars were revolutionizing the art of prediction with mathematics, precision instruments, and detailed observations that would make ancient Babylonians jealous. The Islamic Golden Age, roughly spanning the 8th to 13th centuries, transformed astrology from simple stargazing into serious science. Well, sort of. These weren't your typical fortune tellers reading palms at village markets. Islamic astrologers were often the same people advancing astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. They built observatories, calculated planetary positions with stunning accuracy, and created prediction systems so complex they required years of study to master. Baghdad became the prediction capital of the medieval world. The House of Wisdom attracted scholars from across the known world, all eager to unlock the secrets of tomorrow. These weren't just religious mystics claiming divine visions. They were mathematicians who could predict eclipses decades in advance, physicians who believed planetary positions affected human health, and advisors who guided caliphs through political crises using star charts. But here's where it gets interesting. Islamic astrologers didn't just copy ancient Greek or Persian methods, they improved everything. Take the astrolabe for instance. This brass instrument could measure star positions, calculate prayer times, and determine the best moments for medical treatments. European visitors called these devices magical, but Islamic scholars knew better. Math was the real magic. The predictions themselves focused on practical matters. Farmers received detailed calendars showing optimal planting times based on lunar cycles. Physicians scheduled surgeries according to planetary influences, believing Mars in certain positions could cause excessive bleeding. Merchants planned trade routes around astrological forecasts, and rulers delayed battles until the stars aligned favorably. Wrong predictions could mean failed crops, botched medical procedures, or military disasters. Then there were the medical predictions. Islamic astrologers believed each zodiac sign governed different body parts. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, and so on. Physicians would cast horoscopes for patients predicting when fevers would break or wounds would heal. Some of these predictions were surprisingly accurate, though probably more due to careful observation of natural healing patterns than actual stellar influence. Political astrology reached new heights of complexity. Court astrologers maintained detailed records of royal births, creating elaborate charts predicting everything from the length of a ruler's reign to the success of military campaigns. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad rarely made major decisions without consulting their astrologers first. These weren't quick consultations either. A single political prediction might require weeks of calculations, cross-referencing multiple astronomical tables and historical precedents. However, not everyone bought into the hype. Islamic scholars engaged in heated debates about astrology's validity. Al-Biruni, one of the greatest medieval scientists, criticized astrologers for making vague predictions that could be interpreted multiple ways. He demanded proof, conducting what might be history's first systematic studies of astrological accuracy. His conclusion: most predictions failed spectacularly when tested rigorously. The controversy intensified when religious authorities got involved. Some Islamic scholars argued that astrology contradicted divine will. If Allah controlled everything, how could stars determine human fate? This theological problem created a fascinating split. Astronomy was celebrated as revealing God's magnificent creation, while astrology faced increasing suspicion as potentially heretical. Despite religious concerns, astrology books became medieval bestsellers. Works like Al-Kindi's On the Stellar Rays and Al-Bumasar's Great Introduction spread throughout the Islamic world and beyond. These weren't simple almanacs, but sophisticated treatises combining Greek philosophy, Persian traditions, and original mathematical innovations. European scholars would later translate these works, sparking astrology's revival in medieval universities. The practical applications kept astrology alive even among skeptics. Maritime astrologers predicted favorable sailing conditions, helping Islamic traders dominate medieval commerce. Agricultural astrologers developed crop rotation systems based on planetary cycles. Even skeptical rulers kept astrologers on staff, just in case their calculations proved useful. But the real genius lay in record keeping. Islamic astrologers maintained meticulous observation logs, tracking planetary positions, weather patterns, and earthly events across centuries. These records became invaluable for later astronomers, even those who rejected astrology entirely. The data collected by medieval Islamic astrologers helped establish genuine astronomical science. The instruments they developed were equally revolutionary. Beyond astrolabes, Islamic craftsmen created armillary spheres, quadrants, and other precision devices that made accurate predictions possible. These tools spread along trade routes, reaching India, China, and eventually Europe. Medieval Islamic workshops became prediction technology centers, exporting both instruments and knowledge. Yet, astrology's golden age in the Islamic world was already facing challenges. Religious orthodoxy grew increasingly hostile to fortune-telling practices. Mathematical astronomy was proving that accurate celestial predictions didn't require astrological interpretations. The writing was on the wall, though few could read those particular omens. Meanwhile, in distant China, emperors were developing their own elaborate systems for reading heaven's will, creating prediction methods that would make even Baghdad's astrologers pause in amazement. Ancient China had a serious problem. The emperor wasn't just running a country, he was supposedly chosen by heaven itself. Every earthquake, comet, or strange bird flight could signal that heaven was getting annoyed with his leadership. Talk about pressure. The mandate of heaven wasn't just religious mumbo-jumbo, it was the entire foundation of Chinese political power. If natural disasters struck, people whispered that maybe the dynasty was losing heaven's approval. Rebellions started over eclipses. Wars began because of weird cloud formations. The emperor's astrologers weren't just advisors, they were the difference between keeping the throne and losing their heads. Chinese court astrologers kept incredibly detailed records of everything unusual. A two-headed chicken born in the countryside, written down. A red sunset that lasted too long, documented. Strange dreams reported by villagers, all filed away in massive imperial libraries. These weren't just random observations, they were treated as vital intelligence about the future of the entire empire. But here's where things get really interesting. Chinese astronomy was centuries ahead of European science. While medieval Europeans were still arguing about whether the Earth was round, Chinese astronomers had already mapped star movements with stunning accuracy. They predicted eclipses so precisely that other cultures thought they controlled the sun and moon through magic. The Imperial Astronomy Bureau employed hundreds of people. They had specialists for different types of omens, star watchers, earthquake interpreters, weather pattern analysts. Some focused entirely on animal behavior, others studied the emperor's dreams. There were even officials whose only job was watching for unusual births among the palace livestock. Then there's the fascinating case of Halley's Comet. Chinese astronomers recorded its appearances for over 2,000 years before Europeans even knew it existed. Every time it showed up, court astrologers debated what it meant. Sometimes they declared it a good omen, heaven celebrating the emperor's wisdom. Other times, especially if the dynasty was already shaky, the same comet became a warning of doom. Wrong predictions could destroy careers instantly. Emperor Wu of Han once had his top astrologer executed because a lucky military campaign ended in disaster. The pressure was so intense that some court astronomers developed elaborate hedging strategies. They'd make predictions so vague that almost any outcome could be interpreted as correct. Sound familiar? Chinese astrologers also invented something Europeans wouldn't develop for centuries: statistical analysis of omens. They kept charts showing which types of events usually preceded famines, floods, or foreign invasions. These correlation studies were surprisingly sophisticated. They noticed that certain earthquake patterns often came before harsh winters. They tracked how animal migrations related to weather changes. The weird part is how accurate some of these predictions actually were. Chinese astronomers correctly predicted the timing of monsoons, which helped farmers plan crops centuries before modern meteorology. They identified earthquake warning signs that modern seismologists still consider valid. Their understanding of animal behavior before natural disasters was remarkably advanced. Imperial astrologers didn't just predict natural events, they shaped them through policy recommendations. If the stars suggested a drought was coming, the emperor might order extra grain storage. If omens pointed toward foreign invasion, military preparations would intensify. These predictions became self-fulfilling prophecies, making the astrologers appear even more accurate. Let's not forget the incredible bureaucracy involved. Every province had to report unusual events to the capital. Local officials knew their careers depended on not missing important omens. This created a massive intelligence network that was probably more comprehensive than any modern weather service. Every strange cloud, unusual animal behavior, or minor earthquake was documented and analyzed. Chinese dynastic histories contain thousands of pages devoted to astronomical observations and their interpretations. The Tang dynasty alone recorded over 3,000 separate omen events in a single century. These weren't brief mentions, they included detailed descriptions of the phenomena, multiple interpretations from different experts, and follow-up analysis of whether the predictions came true. The most fascinating aspect was how different dynasties used the same omens to support completely opposite conclusions. The Song dynasty might interpret a comet as heaven's blessing on their peaceful policies. Later, the Ming dynasty would use identical comet appearances to justify aggressive military campaigns. Political convenience often trumped astronomical consistency. Court astrologers developed secret codes for communicating bad news to emperors. Nobody wanted to directly tell the Son of Heaven that the stars predicted his downfall. They created elaborate metaphorical language where temporary clouds obscuring the northern constellation actually meant your empire might collapse next year. Diplomatic fortune-telling. This obsession with celestial signs created an unexpected side effect. Chinese written language contains more words for different types of clouds, star configurations, and atmospheric phenomena than any other ancient language. They literally developed vocabulary just to describe omens more precisely. But here's what makes Chinese dynastic prediction unique: it never completely disappeared. Even as scientific methods spread globally, Chinese leaders continued consulting traditional fortune-telling alongside modern techniques. The blend of ancient wisdom and new technology would create some truly unexpected prediction methods that still influence decision-making today. The Chinese emperors weren't the only ones obsessed with knowing their fate. While dynasties rose and fell in the East, medieval Europeans were busy developing their own prediction methods. But here's the twist: they weren't just consulting priests or studying stars. They were creating something entirely new, books that promised to reveal your future using nothing more than dice, cards, or random chance. These weren't your typical religious texts filled with heavy theology. Medieval fortune-telling books were like ancient slot machines, designed for regular people who couldn't afford expensive astrologers or oracle consultations. You'd roll dice, draw cards, or flip coins, then look up your combination in the book to discover what tomorrow held. Simple, affordable, and surprisingly addictive. The most popular of these was called the Sortis Sanctorum, or Sacred Lots. Players would ask a question, then randomly select a passage that supposedly contained their answer. Some versions used numbered verses from the Bible, while others featured custom predictions written specifically for the book. Think of it as medieval Google, except instead of searching, you were gambling with fate. But the real game changer came with books like The Wheel of Fortune and Books of Fate. These weren't just random Bible verses, they were systematic prediction engines. You'd roll 3 dice, add up the numbers, then flip to the corresponding page. Each combination had its own prophecy about love, money, health, or death. Roll a 12, you might read about an upcoming windfall. Snake eyes, prepare for betrayal. What made these books brilliant was their practicality. Medieval people lived harsh, unpredictable lives, where a bad harvest meant starvation, and a minor injury could prove fatal. These fortune-telling books offered hope and guidance for a few copper coins. They promised answers to questions that kept people awake at night. Will my crops survive? Should I marry this person? Will my children live through winter? Then there's the social aspect nobody talks about. These books became party entertainment for medieval households. Families would gather around the fire, take turns rolling dice, and share their fortunes. It was like ancient board game night, except the stakes felt real. Young women used them to discover their future husbands' names. Merchants consulted them before major business deals. Even some clergy secretly owned copies, despite official church disapproval. The church had mixed feelings about these prediction books. Some leaders condemned them as superstitious nonsense that competed with proper prayer and divine guidance. Others tolerated them as harmless fun, especially versions that incorporated biblical passages. But here's where it gets interesting. Many monks and scribes were secretly copying and selling these books to make extra money. Religious authorities publicly frowned while privately profiting. Medieval fortune-telling books weren't limited to dice games either. Some used elaborate card systems with symbols representing different aspects of life. Others featured spinning wheels or complex charts that required multiple random selections. The Rota Fortunae used a circular diagram where you'd place your finger blindfolded, then read the prophecy from that section. These books were basically medieval video games, interactive, engaging, and surprisingly sophisticated. The content could be surprisingly specific too. Instead of vague statements like "good fortune awaits," these books offered detailed scenarios. A person wearing blue will bring news from a distant land within 7 days, or beware of a one-eyed merchant who offers silver coins. The more specific the prediction, the more people believed in the book's power. Why? Because specific predictions felt more legitimate than generic platitudes. What's fascinating is how these books reflected medieval anxieties. Predictions about plague, war, and famine appeared frequently, revealing what truly worried people. Love and marriage dominated sections aimed at young adults. Questions about inheritance and property filled pages targeting older readers. These weren't just fortune-telling tools, they were mirrors reflecting medieval society's deepest concerns. The invention of the printing press around 1450 transformed everything. Suddenly, fortune-telling books could be mass-produced instead of painstakingly hand-copied by monks. Costs plummeted while availability exploded. By 1500, printed fortune-telling books were spreading across Europe faster than news of royal marriages. Street vendors sold them alongside bread and ale. Traveling merchants carried them to remote villages. Even illiterate people could participate by having someone else read their fortunes aloud. Different regions developed their own variations. German books favored mathematical approaches with complex number systems. French versions emphasized romantic predictions and courtly love. English books mixed practical advice with mystical prophecy. Italian editions incorporated classical mythology alongside Christian symbolism. Each culture adapted the basic concept to match local beliefs and concerns. These medieval prediction books did something remarkable. They democratized fortune-telling. No longer did you need access to expensive oracles, royal astrologers, or powerful shamans. For the price of a loaf of bread, anyone could glimpse their future. This shift would prove crucial as Europe moved toward a more commercial, literacy-based society. But printing presses weren't just spreading fortune-telling books. They were about to revolutionize another type of prediction entirely, one that would affect farmers, sailors, and entire kingdoms. Something was coming that would make medieval dice games look like child's play. After centuries of mystics, oracles, and fortune-tellers serving kings and nobles, something revolutionary happened in 16th century Europe. Prediction went public. Common farmers, merchants, and housewives suddenly had access to their own crystal ball, except it came bound in paper and cost less than a chicken. Welcome to the age of almanacs. These weren't fancy royal horoscopes locked away in palace libraries. Almanacs were cheap, practical prediction books that ordinary people could actually afford. Think of them as the world's first mass-produced fortune cookies, but way more useful. They promised to tell you when to plant crops, when storms might hit, which days brought good luck, and even when plagues might strike your town. The timing couldn't have been better. Gutenberg's printing press had just made books affordable for regular folks. Meanwhile, people were desperate for guidance in an unpredictable world, where bad weather meant starvation and wrong timing could ruin entire families. Early almanac makers weren't messing around with vague prophecies either. They crammed these little books with specific predictions. March 15th will bring heavy rains. Plant beans during the first week of May. Avoid travel on Thursday the 12th. The stars look angry. Some even predicted political upheavals, wars, and disease outbreaks with startling confidence. But here's where it gets interesting. These predictions actually worked sometimes, at least the weather and farming advice. Not because almanac writers had magical powers, but because they were secretly using centuries of accumulated wisdom. Smart almanac authors studied old records, talked to experienced farmers, and paid attention to natural patterns their ancestors had noticed. The most successful almanacs mixed astronomical calculations with folk wisdom. Writers would calculate when eclipses and planetary alignments would occur, genuine astronomy that impressed readers. Then they'd sprinkle in traditional sayings like red sky at night, sailor's delight, alongside their star charts. People got science and superstition bundled together in one convenient package. Some almanac predictions became self-fulfilling prophecies in bizarre ways. If an almanac declared certain days unlucky for business, merchants would actually avoid making deals on those dates. When fewer transactions happened, economic problems followed, proving the almanac right about bad luck days. Clever writers learned to exploit this psychological effect. Then there were the weather predictions, which almanac makers approached with wild optimism. They'd confidently predict rain, snow, and sunshine months in advance, despite having no real meteorological tools. Some got lucky with general seasonal patterns, others failed spectacularly, but readers seemed to forget the misses and remember the hits. The most entertaining predictions involved politics and disasters. Almanac writers would hint at great changes coming to kingdoms or warn about pestilence in the summer months. When something dramatic actually happened, readers assumed their almanac had supernatural insight. When nothing happened, well, maybe the prediction prevented the disaster through divine intervention. European almanac sales exploded by 1600, making them genuine bestsellers. In England, almanacs outsold every other type of book except the Bible. French almanacs became so popular that the government started regulating them, worried about their influence on public opinion. German almanacs sparked heated debates between competing astrologers, who publicly argued about whose predictions were more accurate. What made almanacs truly revolutionary wasn't their accuracy, it was their democracy. For the first time in history, peasants could consult the same type of cosmic guidance that emperors had enjoyed. A farmer's wife could check whether the stars favored her daughter's wedding date. A blacksmith could avoid unlucky days for starting new projects. This democratization of prediction created unexpected social changes. People began making plans based on almanac advice, rather than just following local traditions or church guidance. Some historians argue that almanacs helped ordinary Europeans develop more independent thinking about their futures. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about commoners having access to prophecy. Religious authorities worried that almanacs competed with divine providence. Some nobles felt threatened when their servants started making decisions based on star charts rather than orders. Yet almanacs kept spreading, adapting to local needs wherever they traveled. Spanish almanacs focused heavily on Catholic saints' days. Dutch versions emphasized maritime predictions for sailors and fishermen. Italian almanacs mixed classical Roman augury with Renaissance astronomy. The weird part is how seriously people took these predictions. Families would postpone weddings, delay business trips, and even time pregnancies based on almanac advice. Some cities recorded dramatic drops in activity on days that almanacs marked as particularly unlucky. By the early 1600s, almanac writers had become minor celebrities, with fans eagerly awaiting each year's new edition. The most famous authors developed distinctive styles. Some focused on doom and gloom, others promised mostly good fortune ahead. But while almanacs were democratizing prediction in Europe, something completely different was happening elsewhere. In parlors and markets, people were discovering they could read destiny in the lines of their own hands. Victorian England had some truly bizarre ideas about predicting the future. Picture this: a well-dressed gentleman examining your palm with the seriousness of a doctor, claiming he could see exactly when you'd die. Or better yet, running his fingers across the bumps on your skull to determine if you'd become a criminal. Welcome to the golden age of palmistry and phrenology, where reading hands and heads became the hottest prediction trends of the 1800s. Palm reading wasn't new, but the Victorians turned it into a proper science. Well, they thought it was science anyway. The basic idea was simple enough. Every line, mount and crease on your hand supposedly revealed something about your personality and future. The heart line predicted love affairs. The lifeline showed how long you'd live. The headline revealed your intelligence and career prospects. What made Victorian palmistry different was its obsession with classification. Palmists created elaborate charts mapping every possible marking. A short thumb meant you were weak-willed, long fingers indicated an artistic nature. Even the width of your palm mattered. Apparently narrow hands belonged to selfish people. These weren't casual observations either. Palmists wrote thick books with detailed diagrams, treating hand analysis like medical diagnosis. The popularity exploded when traveling fortune tellers started setting up booths at markets and fairs. For a few pennies, anyone could learn their fate. Factory workers wanted to know if they'd find better jobs. Young women asked about marriage prospects. Businessmen sought predictions about financial success. Palm reading offered hope to people trapped in rigid social classes. Maybe the lines on their hands revealed a better future than their current circumstances suggested. Then there's phrenology, which might be even stranger than palmistry. Franz Joseph Gall, a German physician, invented this practice in the late 1700s, but it reached peak madness during the Victorian era. Phrenologists believed your skull's shape and bumps revealed everything about your character and destiny. The theory went like this: different brain areas controlled different personality traits. If someone had a large destructiveness region, that part of their skull would bulge outward. A prominent amativeness bump meant you were overly romantic. Phrenologists identified dozens of these areas, each supposedly predicting specific behaviors and future outcomes. What's wild is how seriously people took this. Employers used phrenology to screen job candidates. Parents had their children's heads examined to plan their education. Some courts even considered phrenological evidence during criminal trials. The bumps on your head could literally determine your career prospects. Victorian phrenologists toured cities giving public demonstrations. They'd call volunteers on stage, feel their skulls, and make bold predictions about their futures. This gentleman has an enlarged organ of acquisitiveness. He's destined for business success. The audience ate it up. Here was science apparently proving that destiny was written in bone and flesh. Both practices thrived because they offered something the rapidly changing industrial world desperately needed: certainty. Traditional fortune-telling seemed too mystical for the scientific age, but palmistry and phrenology used measurements, charts and technical vocabulary. They felt modern and rational, even when making the most outrageous claims. The business side was impressive too. Professional palmists and phrenologists opened offices in major cities, charging fees that rivaled doctors. They published magazines, sold how-to guides, and trained apprentices. Some became genuinely wealthy by reading hands and feeling heads. Let's not forget the social implications. These prediction methods were supposedly democratic. Anyone could learn to read palms or examine skulls. You didn't need royal blood or religious authority. Your fate was literally in your hands or on your head. This appealed to Victorian ideals about self-improvement and personal responsibility. But here's where things get interesting. Even as these practices peaked in popularity, skeptics were organizing resistance. Scientists began conducting controlled tests, comparing phrenological predictions to actual behavior. Guess what? The results were terrible. Meanwhile, doctors pointed out that skull shape had nothing to do with brain function. The weird part is how long both practices survived scientific debunking, even after medical evidence proved them wrong. Palmistry and phrenology remained popular entertainment. People enjoyed the experience regardless of accuracy. Getting your palm read was fun, social, and gave you something to talk about later. By the early 1900s, both practices had largely moved from science to amusement. Palmists still worked at carnivals and beach boardwalks, but nobody pretended they were conducting medical examinations anymore. Phrenology mostly disappeared. Though you can still find palm readers today, they're just honest about being entertainers rather than scientists. The Victorian obsession with reading bodies for clues about the future reveals something important about human nature. People want to believe their destiny is discoverable, even if the method seems ridiculous in hindsight. These practices offered hope, community, and the illusion of control during uncertain times. While palmists were feeling hands and phrenologists were measuring skulls, other Victorians were taking a completely different approach to prediction. Instead of examining individual body parts, They started looking at something much bigger, the power of collecting and analyzing vast amounts of data to see patterns no one had noticed before. The 17th century brought something revolutionary to the prediction game. Scientists stopped accepting because the ancients said so as a valid answer. Francis Bacon, the English philosopher, basically told everyone to throw out their dusty old books and start over. His message was simple: collect data, run experiments, and let the evidence speak. This shift changed everything about how people approached the future. Instead of consulting priests about whether the gods were angry, scholars started tracking actual patterns in nature. They measured eclipses down to the minute and recorded tidal movements with obsessive precision. The idea was radical for its time. Maybe humans could understand tomorrow by studying today's facts. Edmund Halley became the poster child for this new approach. While others were still reading tea leaves, he was calculating the orbit of a comet using pure mathematics. In 1705, he boldly predicted that a specific comet would return in 1758. The guy was so confident he put his name on it. Halley's comet became the first major celestial prediction based entirely on scientific observation rather than mystical interpretation. The telescope revolutionized how people saw the future, literally. Galileo's observations of Jupiter's moons proved that celestial bodies followed predictable laws, not the whims of angry deities. Suddenly, eclipses weren't divine warnings but calculable events that could be predicted decades in advance. This mathematical precision made astrologers look pretty foolish by comparison. Weather prediction, however, remained stubbornly medieval. Even as scientists conquered the heavens, they couldn't figure out if it would rain tomorrow. Farmers still relied on folklore like red sky at night, sailor's delight, because actual meteorology didn't exist yet. The atmosphere was too complex for 17th-century mathematics to handle. But here's where things get interesting. Scientists discovered that some natural events followed patterns so reliable they could set clocks by them. Tides rose and fell with lunar precision. Seasons changed on schedule. Even animal migrations happened with clockwork regularity. Nature, it turned out, wasn't as chaotic as everyone thought. The Royal Society of London, founded in 1660, became ground zero for this experimental revolution. Members shared observations from across Europe, creating the first international network of scientific data collection. They documented everything from magnetic variations to plant growth patterns. Their motto said it all: take nobody's word for it. Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, in 1687, proved that mathematical laws governed the universe. If you could calculate planetary orbits, why not predict other natural phenomena? Newton's work suggested that everything from falling apples to ocean tides followed discoverable rules. The future suddenly seemed less mysterious and more mathematical. Then there's the curious case of early probability theory. Blaise Pascal and Pierre de Fermat developed mathematical frameworks for predicting uncertain outcomes. They weren't fortune tellers, they were solving practical gambling problems. But their work laid the groundwork for all modern statistical prediction. Who knew that helping gamblers could advance science? The printing press accelerated this scientific revolution by spreading new ideas faster than ever before. Experimental results published in London could influence researchers in Prague within months. This rapid information exchange meant that prediction methods improved quickly as scientists built on each other's discoveries. Religious authorities weren't thrilled about these developments. The Catholic Church had already tangled with Galileo over his astronomical observations. Now scientists were essentially claiming they could predict God's creation using human reason alone. Some religious leaders saw this as dangerous hubris, while others embraced it as understanding divine design. Navigation became the testing ground for scientific prediction. Ship captains needed accurate star charts to cross oceans safely. Traditional methods based on ancient Greek astronomy were killing sailors through inaccuracy. New mathematical techniques for celestial navigation literally saved lives, proving that scientific prediction worked better than traditional wisdom. The scientific revolution also introduced controlled experiments to prediction. Instead of just observing natural events, researchers began manipulating variables to test their theories. They grew plants under different conditions, mixed chemicals in precise ratios, and measured results obsessively. This experimental approach revealed cause and effect relationships that made future outcomes more predictable. Medical prediction remained largely guesswork though. Doctors still believed in balancing bodily humors and couldn't predict disease outbreaks with any accuracy. The connection between germs and illness wouldn't be discovered for another 2 centuries. Even cutting-edge scientists were helpless against plague and smallpox. What made this era special wasn't just better tools or smarter people. It was a fundamental shift in thinking about knowledge itself. Previous generations trusted ancient authorities and religious revelations. The 17th century said, "Show me the data." This skeptical approach to truth would eventually transform not just prediction but all human understanding. The age of scientific experiments proved that systematic observation could unlock nature's secrets. But collecting all this data created a new challenge. How do you turn mountains of information into useful predictions? The answer would come from an unlikely source: mathematicians who were trying to solve completely different problems involving insurance and gambling. Numbers don't lie, but people sure struggled to understand them properly for centuries. By the 1700s, a few clever minds started realizing something revolutionary. If you collected enough data about what happened before, you might actually predict what comes next. Not through magic or bird guts, but through cold, hard math. The breakthrough came from an unlikely place: gambling houses and insurance companies. These folks had serious money on the line, which meant they couldn't afford to rely on superstition anymore. Well, mostly. Jacob Bernoulli, a Swiss mathematician, spent decades working on what he called the law of large numbers. His basic idea: flip a coin 10 times, and you might get 7 heads. But flip it 10,000 times, and you'll get pretty close to 50% heads every single time. The more data you collect, the clearer the patterns become. Insurance companies jumped on this concept faster than a cat on a mouse. They started tracking everything: how long people lived, when buildings burned down, which ships made it safely to port. Lloyd's of London became famous for insuring anything that moved, from merchant vessels to famous singers' vocal cords. But they weren't just throwing darts at a board anymore, they were using actual death records and accident reports to figure out their odds. Then there's John Grant, who did something that sounds incredibly boring but changed everything. He spent years counting deaths in London, categorizing them by age, disease and season. His 1662 book was basically a list of who died and why, but it revealed shocking patterns. Plague years killed more young people. Winter months were deadlier for the elderly. Certain neighborhoods had much higher death rates than others. Politicians and city planners started paying attention because Grant's numbers predicted future outbreaks. If deaths from a particular disease spiked in one area, authorities could expect it to spread to neighboring districts within weeks. Makes sense, right? The real game changer came when mathematicians like Pierre-Simon Laplace began applying probability theory to everything from astronomy to sociology. Laplace famously declared that if someone knew the exact position and momentum of every atom in the universe, they could predict the entire future with mathematical precision. He was wrong about that part, but his work on probability laid the foundation for modern statistics. French and English governments started commissioning massive surveys to count populations, measure crop yields, and track trade volumes. These weren't just random curiosity projects. They were serious attempts to predict tax revenues, military recruitment numbers, and food shortages before they happened. Agricultural prediction became particularly crucial because famines could topple governments. Statistical pioneers like William Petty began correlating weather patterns with harvest yields, creating the first data-driven farming forecasts. If rainfall measurements from previous years showed certain patterns, farmers could adjust their planting schedules accordingly. But here's where things get really interesting. Some of these early statisticians discovered that human behavior followed predictable patterns too. Crime rates, marriage rates, even suicide rates showed consistent seasonal fluctuations. Summer brought more assaults. Spring brought more weddings. Economic downturns brought more desperate acts. Adolphe Quetelet, a Belgian polymath, took this concept and ran with it. He calculated the average man for various European countries, average height, weight, chest measurements, even average propensity for crime. His work suggested that individual human choices, while unpredictable, became mathematically predictable when viewed across large populations. Insurance companies loved this revelation because it meant they could price policies based on statistical likelihood rather than gut feelings. Young men paid more for life insurance because the numbers showed they died in accidents more frequently. Married men paid less because statistics proved they lived longer than bachelors. The Catholic Church wasn't thrilled with these developments. If human behavior followed mathematical laws, what happened to free will and divine providence? Some religious authorities banned the teaching of probability theory in universities, arguing it encouraged gambling and challenged God's sovereignty over human destiny. Meanwhile, governments quietly embraced statistical prediction for military planning. Napoleon's armies used probability calculations to estimate supply needs and troop casualties for upcoming campaigns. The Duke of Wellington reportedly consulted mortality tables before major battles to predict how many reinforcements he'd need. Early stock markets also began incorporating statistical analysis, though with mixed results. Speculators discovered that tulip bulb prices and shipping company stocks followed certain seasonal patterns, but they learned the hard way that past performance didn't guarantee future results when entire markets collapsed unexpectedly. The most significant shift was cultural. For thousands of years, humans had looked to priests, oracles, and mystics for glimpses of tomorrow. Now a new class of experts emerged, statisticians and actuaries who claimed superior prediction methods based on empirical evidence rather than supernatural insight. Of course, numbers couldn't predict everything. Wars still surprised nations, natural disasters still caught communities off guard. Individual people still made choices that defied statistical expectations, but something fundamental had changed in how humans approached the future. Data collection and mathematical analysis were becoming the new divination tools, and their influence would only grow stronger as the Industrial Revolution created even more complex systems to predict and control. The Victorian era brought something completely unexpected to the prediction game. While scientists were busy with their newfangled statistics and data collection, ordinary people were gathering in dimly lit parlors for something far more mysterious. They wanted to chat with the dead. Spiritualism exploded across Britain and America in the 1840s like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone knew someone who claimed they could contact spirits from beyond the grave. These weren't just fortune tellers reading palms at county fairs. We're talking about respectable middle-class folks hosting seances in their drawing rooms, convinced that deceased relatives had important messages about what lay ahead. The whole craze supposedly started with two teenage sisters in upstate New York. The Fox sisters claimed they could communicate with spirits through mysterious knocking sounds. Word spread fast. Soon mediums were popping up everywhere, each with their own dramatic flair for receiving otherworldly visions. Here's where it gets interesting. Victorian mediums didn't just talk to dead Aunt Martha about family gossip. They claimed spirits could see into the future with perfect clarity. After all, if you're floating around in the afterlife, wouldn't you have a better view of what's coming next? Seances became the hottest social activity of the era. Picture this: a dozen well-dressed Victorians sitting around a table in a darkened room, holding hands while a medium goes into dramatic trances. The spirits supposedly spoke through the medium, offering predictions about everything from business ventures to romantic prospects. Some mediums would write frantically while in their trance state, producing pages of prophecies they claimed came directly from the spirit world. The predictions were often remarkably specific. Spirits would warn about upcoming illnesses, predict the outcomes of political elections, or reveal the perfect timing for major life decisions. One famous medium, Daniel Douglas Home, allegedly received spirit messages that helped wealthy clients make fortune-building investments. His supernatural stock tips were so successful that skeptics accused him of insider trading rather than otherworldly communication. But here's the weird part. Many of these predictions actually came true, or at least enough of them did, to keep people coming back for more. Was it genuine supernatural insight, clever guesswork, or something else entirely? Newspapers couldn't get enough of these ghostly predictions. Stories of accurate spirit prophecies sold papers faster than scandal sheets. The London press regularly featured accounts of mediums who had predicted train accidents, business failures, or political upheavals with startling accuracy. Public fascination reached fever pitch when some mediums claimed to receive messages from famous historical figures, offering glimpses of Britain's destiny. Well, not everyone was buying it. Scientists and skeptics began investigating these supernatural claims with the same rigor they applied to other phenomena. Harry Houdini, the famous magician, made it his personal mission to expose fraudulent mediums. He discovered an entire toolkit of tricks, hidden assistants producing spirit voices, tables rigged with mechanical devices for mysterious movements, and elaborate research networks that helped mediums gather personal information about their clients beforehand. The investigations revealed something fascinating about human psychology. People desperately wanted these predictions to be real. They were living through rapid social changes, industrialization, urbanization, scientific discoveries that challenged traditional beliefs. In this uncertain world, the promise of supernatural guidance felt incredibly appealing. Governments started paying attention too. Some banned fortune-telling entirely, viewing it as fraud that preyed on vulnerable people. Others imposed heavy taxes on anyone claiming to predict the future for money. The legal battles were fierce. Mediums argued they were providing genuine spiritual services, while authorities insisted they were running elaborate confidence games. Then there were the true believers in high places. Even Queen Victoria herself reportedly consulted mediums after Prince Albert's death, seeking messages from her beloved husband about Britain's future. If royalty was dabbling in spiritualism, how could ordinary citizens resist? The movement produced its own celebrities. Famous mediums toured like rock stars, filling theaters with audiences hungry for prophecies. Some became wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, living in mansions funded by predictions that may or may not have come from beyond the grave. What made Victorian spiritualism different from earlier prediction methods was its democratic nature. You didn't need special training to become a medium. Anyone could claim to have the gift. This created a wild marketplace of competing prophets, each offering their own unique connection to the spirit world. The predictions themselves evolved too. Early mediums focused on personal matters, but as the movement matured, spirits began offering grander visions. They predicted technological breakthroughs, warned of coming wars, and even described what the distant future might look like. By the early 1900s, spiritualism's golden age was fading. Too many exposed frauds had damaged public confidence. But the movement had established something important. Prediction was no longer limited to priests, scholars, or government officials. Anyone could claim supernatural insight into tomorrow. The Victorian obsession with ghostly predictions was about to give way to something more practical. People were starting to notice patterns in the natural world that might offer more reliable glimpses of what lay ahead. The Victorian era was obsessed with two things: proper etiquette and predicting when storms would ruin their perfectly planned garden parties. While seances dominated drawing rooms, something far more practical was brewing in the scientific community. Weather forecasting was about to become humanity's first truly successful large-scale prediction system. Before the 1800s, weather prediction was basically educated guesswork mixed with folklore. Sailors watched cloud formations and felt their bones ache before storms. Farmers relied on almanacs that were only slightly more accurate than throwing darts at a calendar. Red sky at night? Sailors' delight? Sure, sometimes it worked, but sometimes it didn't, and people died because of bad weather decisions. Then came the telegraph in the 1840s, and everything changed. Suddenly, weather observations from hundreds of miles away could arrive in minutes instead of weeks. A storm hitting Chicago could warn New York before it got there. Makes sense, right? Weather moves in patterns across large distances, but nobody could see those patterns until they could collect information fast enough. The real breakthrough happened when Robert Fitzroy, a British naval officer, started gathering weather reports from telegraph stations across Britain. Fitzroy had sailed with Charles Darwin and understood how crucial accurate weather information was for ships. He convinced the government to fund a network of weather observers who would telegraph their daily readings to London. On August 1, 1861, Fitzroy published the world's first public weather forecast in the Times newspaper. The headline was modest: "General weather probable during the next 2 days." But this tiny prediction represented a massive leap forward. For the first time in human history, someone was using real-time data from multiple locations to guess what tomorrow's weather might bring. The early forecasts were rough around the edges. Fitzroy's predictions were right about 65% of the time, which sounds terrible until you realize that random guessing would only be right about 33% of the time. People complained constantly about wrong forecasts, but they kept reading them every morning. Even bad predictions were better than no predictions at all. America jumped into weather forecasting with typical enthusiasm. The U.S. Army Signal Corps started issuing weather warnings in 1870, initially focused on helping ships avoid dangerous storms on the Great Lakes. These weren't gentle suggestions either. Even when the Weather Service raised storm flags, smart captains stayed in port. The weird part is how much resistance early forecasters faced from the public. Newspapers mocked wrong predictions mercilessly. Religious leaders complained that predicting weather was trying to know God's will. Some scientists argued that weather was too chaotic to ever predict accurately. They weren't entirely wrong, but they missed the point that somewhat accurate was still incredibly valuable. Telegraph networks expanded rapidly, creating vast webs of weather stations across continents. By 1880, weather observers from hundreds of locations sent twice-daily reports to central offices. These reports included temperature, barometric pressure, wind direction, and cloud conditions. The data was plotted on large maps, and trained meteorologists looked for patterns that might indicate where storms were heading. Weather maps became the first real-time visualization tools for large-scale prediction. Meteorologists drew lines connecting areas of similar atmospheric pressure, creating the familiar weather maps we still see today. High pressure usually meant clear skies, low pressure meant storms, and the boundaries between them showed where weather was changing. The technology was revolutionary, but the science was still primitive. Nobody understood jet streams, air masses, or the complex mathematics of atmospheric physics. Early forecasters relied on pattern recognition and experience rather than scientific models. They were like doctors diagnosing illnesses before understanding germs. Bulls, sometimes successful, often baffled. Let's not forget the human drama behind these early forecasts. Weather observers worked in isolation, taking measurements every few hours regardless of conditions. They climbed towers during lightning storms, recorded temperatures in blizzards, and maintained equipment with no backup systems. Telegraph operators transmitted thousands of weather codes daily, knowing that wrong numbers could lead to maritime disasters. The economic impact was immediate and enormous. Shipping companies saved fortunes by avoiding storms. Farmers began timing harvests around weather predictions. Insurance companies started using weather data to assess risks. An entire industry built around prediction was emerging, driven by simple telegraph messages and hand-drawn maps. European countries raced to build their own weather services. France, Germany, and Austria established national meteorological offices within decades of Britain's success. International cooperation became essential as meteorologists realized that weather systems crossed borders without passports. The first international weather data exchanges began in the 1870s, but these early successes revealed a fundamental challenge that would plague prediction for centuries to come. The more accurate forecasts became, the more people expected from them. A 65% accuracy rate was miraculous in 1861, but disappointing by 1890. Success bred higher expectations, which bred more criticism when predictions failed. While economists were just beginning to think about predicting market behavior, weather forecasters were already proving that systematic data collection could glimpse the future, at least sometimes. By the late 1800s, something interesting was happening in stuffy university halls and bustling financial districts. Economists had stopped just describing what happened to money in markets. Now they wanted to predict what would happen next. This wasn't fortune-telling with tea leaves or crystal balls. These were serious men in serious suits with serious mathematics, convinced they could crack the code of commerce. The results? Well, let's just say confidence didn't always match reality. The story really kicks off with William Stanley Jevons, a British economist who noticed something peculiar about sunspots and business cycles in the 1870s. Jevons spent years tracking solar activity and comparing it to economic booms and busts. His theory was wild but oddly logical. Sunspots affected weather, weather affected crops, crops affected everything else. Therefore, by watching the sun's face, economists could predict financial futures. Jevons published detailed charts and calculations. The scientific community was split between fascination and skepticism, but here's where it gets really interesting. While Jevons was staring at the sun, other economists were developing entirely new ways to visualize economic data. The graph became their weapon of choice. Lines going up meant prosperity. Lines going down meant trouble. Simple charts showing stock prices, grain harvests, and railway profits suddenly made prediction feel scientific and precise. Then came the boom years of the early 1900s, when economic forecasting became big business itself. Investment firms hired mathematicians to create complex models. Banks funded research into market patterns. The New York Stock Exchange was generating so much data that economists felt like gold miners who'd struck the mother lode. Irving Fisher entered the scene as America's most confident economic prophet. This Yale professor had developed elaborate theories about interest rates, inflation, and market behavior. Fisher created detailed mathematical formulas that seemed to explain everything. By the 1920s, he was making bold predictions about permanent prosperity and endless growth. Newspapers quoted him regularly. Investors hung on his every word. Fisher's most famous prediction came in October 1929, just days before the great stock market crash. He declared that stock prices had reached what looks like a permanently high plateau. The market would continue climbing forever. He insisted, because American business had fundamentally changed. Modern corporations were simply too efficient and profitable to fail. 3 days later, the market collapsed. The crash didn't just destroy fortunes, it shattered faith in economic prediction itself. Fisher lost his own wealth and much of his reputation. But the real damage went deeper. The entire idea that mathematics could tame the wild beast of market behavior suddenly seemed naive, even dangerous. Yet something fascinating emerged from this disaster. Economists didn't abandon prediction, they got more honest about its limitations. The 1930s saw the birth of more sophisticated approaches that mixed hard numbers with human psychology. Researchers began studying why people make irrational financial decisions, how emotions drive markets, and why crowds sometimes act completely insane. John Maynard Keynes revolutionized economic thinking by acknowledging uncertainty as a permanent feature of markets. Keynes had actually made a fortune by predicting currency movements, so he knew both the power and the peril of forecasting. His key insight was brilliant in its simplicity. Sometimes markets move based on what people think other people will do. Good luck predicting that with sunspot data. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was conducting its own massive experiment in economic prediction through central planning. Communist economists claimed they could predict and control entire national economies through mathematical models and 5-year plans. They built elaborate bureaucracies dedicated to forecasting everything from steel production to potato harvests. The contrast was striking. American economists were becoming humble about their prediction abilities just as Soviet economists were claiming godlike powers of foresight. History would eventually judge which approach worked better, but both systems were wrestling with the same fundamental challenge. Human behavior refuses to follow mathematical formulas. By the 1940s, economic forecasting had settled into a new reality. Practitioners used increasingly sophisticated tools but spoke more carefully about results. They talked about probabilities rather than certainties, trends rather than fixed futures. Charts and graphs became more complex, incorporating multiple variables and confidence intervals. The field had learned a brutal but valuable lesson. Markets weren't machines that followed predictable laws like planets orbiting the sun. They were more like weather systems. Patterns existed, but chaos lurked beneath every forecast. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil might not cause a tornado in Texas, but a rumor whispered on Wall Street could definitely crash a stock. This humbler approach to economic prediction would prove essential as the world moved toward an era of unprecedented technological change. Soon, economists would have access to computing power that made their 1920s predecessors look like cavemen counting on their fingers. But they'd also face new challenges that would make Irving Fisher's overconfidence seem almost quaint. The war years were about to transform not just economics, but the entire science of prediction itself. When bullets started flying in World War I, military leaders quickly realized something terrifying. Traditional battle tactics meant nothing when machine guns could mow down entire regiments in minutes. The future became the most valuable weapon on the battlefield. Both sides desperately needed to know what their enemies would do next, where they'd strike, and when they'd move their forces. Weather prediction suddenly became a matter of life and death. D-Day almost didn't happen because meteorologists couldn't agree on storm patterns over the English Channel. One group said the weather would be terrible on June 5, 1944. Another insisted conditions would improve just enough for the massive invasion. General Eisenhower had to choose which forecast to believe. The wrong call could doom 150,000 Allied soldiers before they even reached the beaches. But here's the weird part. The Germans had their own weather experts making completely different predictions. They were so confident the storms would continue that they relaxed their coastal defenses. Their top commanders even went home for the weekend. The Allies bet everything on a narrow window of slightly better weather, and it worked. One weather forecast literally changed the course of history. Code breaking became the ultimate prediction game during both world wars. The British cracked the German Enigma machine not just to read secret messages but to guess future attacks. Every decoded telegram was like a glimpse into tomorrow's battlefield. Bletchley Park's mathematicians spent sleepless nights trying to predict where U-boats would strike next or which cities would face bombing raids. Then there's the strangest prediction story of the war. British intelligence actually used fortune tellers and astrologers to try understanding Hitler's decision-making. They knew the Nazi leadership consulted astrologers, so MI6 hired their own mystics to predict what German astrologers might tell Hitler. It sounds absolutely insane, but desperate times called for desperate measures. They figured if Hitler believed in star charts, they needed to think like astrologers too. Mathematical prediction took a massive leap forward during wartime. Military strategists couldn't rely on gut feelings when planning massive operations involving millions of soldiers. They started using statistical models to predict casualty rates, supply needs, and battle outcomes. These early military computers were room-sized monsters that could barely handle basic calculations, but they represented something revolutionary: machines helping humans see into the future. Operations research emerged as armies tried to optimize everything from convoy routes to bomber formations. Scientists analyzed thousands of mission reports looking for patterns that could predict success or failure. They discovered that painting planes certain colors made them harder to spot. They figured out the optimal number of destroyers needed to protect merchant ships. Every small improvement in prediction saved lives. Intelligence gathering became incredibly sophisticated. Spies weren't just collecting information about current enemy positions, they were trying to predict future troop movements, supply shortages, and strategic decisions. Photo reconnaissance planes flew dangerous missions to capture images that analysts would study for clues about upcoming operations. A new railroad siding might signal a planned offensive. Extra fuel dumps could mean a major tank battle was coming. Communication interception reached new levels of complexity. Both sides constantly monitored enemy radio traffic, not just for immediate intelligence but for patterns that might reveal future plans. Radio silence often predicted major operations better than intercepted messages did. When German communications suddenly went quiet in certain sectors, Allied commanders knew something big was probably coming. Let's not forget the role of psychological prediction during these conflicts. Military leaders studied enemy commanders like chess masters, trying to anticipate their next moves based on personality, past decisions, and strategic preferences. They kept detailed files on opposing generals, analyzing their tactical preferences and decision-making patterns under pressure. The integration of multiple prediction methods became standard military practice. Weather forecasts, intelligence reports, statistical analysis, and psychological profiles all fed into strategic planning. Commanders couldn't rely on single sources anymore. They needed to combine different types of predictions to make informed decisions. Technology accelerated prediction capabilities at an unprecedented pace. Radar systems could track incoming aircraft and predict their flight paths. Sonar operators learned to anticipate submarine movements. Artillery crews used mathematical calculations to predict where shells would land with deadly accuracy. But even with all these advances, warfare remained unpredictably chaotic. The best predictions still failed when faced with human unpredictability, mechanical failures, or simple bad luck. Military planners learned to build contingencies into their predictions, always preparing for multiple possible outcomes. These wartime innovations in prediction didn't disappear when peace returned. The mathematical models, statistical methods, and technological tools developed for military use would soon find civilian applications. The same computers used to predict battle outcomes would eventually forecast weather patterns, economic trends, and much more. But that transformation from military to civilian prediction would bring its own remarkable changes to how humanity glimpsed tomorrow. Something strange happened after World War II ended. People stopped looking backward at ancient prophecies and started dreaming about rocket ships. The atomic bomb had just changed everything, and suddenly everyone wanted to know what tomorrow's world would look like. Scientists weren't just predicting eclipses anymore. They were promising moon landings, flying cars, and robots that would do our laundry. The space age kicked off with a bang in 1957 when the Soviets launched Sputnik. That little beeping satellite scared Americans so much that President Kennedy promised to land on the moon within a decade. Talk about a bold prediction, but here's the weird part: it actually worked. Scientists used complex math, physics, and engineering to calculate exactly how to shoot humans at the moon and bring them back alive. Neil Armstrong stepped onto lunar soil in 1969, proving that some predictions could literally reach for the stars. Popular magazines went absolutely wild with future predictions during this era. Life magazine promised underwater cities by 1980. Popular Mechanics showed families flying to work in personal helicopters. Science Digest claimed we'd all be eating pill meals instead of actual food. The 1964 World's Fair in New York featured a Futuramas exhibit, where visitors rode through a model world of 2024, complete with weather-controlled domes and nuclear-powered everything. Television shows joined the prediction party too. The Jetsons cartoon showed families living in sky-high apartments with robot maids and video phone calls. Star Trek predicted handheld communicators, flat-screen computers, and automatic doors that opened when you walked near them. The show's writers accidentally predicted cell phones, tablets, and motion sensors decades before they existed. Not bad for a TV series about space adventures. Then there were the futurists, professional predictors who made entire careers out of guessing what came next. Herman Kahn wrote thick books about nuclear war scenarios and population growth. His predictions were terrifying, but helped governments plan for different possibilities. Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, predicted satellites would revolutionize communication. He was so accurate that geosynchronous orbit is sometimes called the Clarke orbit in his honor. But many predictions from this golden age of futurism turned out hilariously wrong. Where are those flying cars we were promised? Why aren't we all living in space colonies? In 1950s, experts swore we'd have robot butlers by now, but most people can barely get their smart speakers to understand simple commands. They predicted we'd work only 15 hours per week because machines would handle everything else. Anyone checking their email at midnight might disagree with that forecast. The biggest prediction failures came from missing entirely new inventions. Almost nobody saw personal computers coming. In 1977, Ken Olsen, president of Digital Equipment Corporation, famously said there was no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. IBM estimated the world market for computers might reach 5 units total. These weren't random fortune tellers making wild guesses. These were technology experts with access to the latest research. The most spectacular miss was the internet. Science fiction writers imagined interplanetary travel, time machines, and telepathic communication. But hardly anyone predicted that ordinary people would carry devices capable of accessing all human knowledge instantly. Even computer scientists working on early network projects didn't fully grasp how revolutionary their work would become. Weather prediction got much more sophisticated during this period, thanks to new satellite technology and faster computers. But even advanced meteorologists couldn't predict something as simple as which songs would become popular or which fashion trends would catch on. Human behavior remained stubbornly unpredictable, no matter how many charts and graphs scientists created. Nuclear energy represented both the promise and peril of technological prediction. Scientists correctly predicted that splitting atoms could generate enormous amounts of electricity. They built power plants that still operate today. However, they also predicted that nuclear energy would become too cheap to meter, and that nuclear-powered airplanes would fill the skies. Reality proved more complicated than their optimistic calculations suggested. The environmental movement began raising uncomfortable questions about all this technological optimism. Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring predicted that pesticides would devastate bird populations and poison food chains. Her predictions proved disturbingly accurate, showing that progress sometimes created new problems nobody had anticipated. Space exploration continued delivering on its wildest promises throughout the 1960s and 1970s. Robotic probes visited Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, sending back photographs that looked exactly like science fiction movies. Communication satellites made global television broadcasts possible, fulfilling predictions that seemed impossible just decades earlier. But as the century progressed, people started noticing that prediction had become much more complicated than anyone expected. Technology was advancing faster than ever, but human society was changing in ways that pure science couldn't capture. The next revolution wouldn't come from rockets or nuclear reactors. It would come from machines that could think and calculate at speeds that would make even the boldest futurists dizzy. The 1950s brought something revolutionary to prediction: machines that could think faster than any human brain. Early computers filled entire rooms and needed teams of technicians just to keep them running. These mechanical monsters consumed more electricity than small towns, but they could crunch numbers at speeds that seemed almost magical. Weather forecasters were among the first to realize what this meant. Before computers, creating a single weather forecast required dozens of meteorologists working for hours with slide rules and paper charts. The math was brutal. Predicting tomorrow's weather across just one state involved solving thousands of complex equations by hand. Most of the time, the forecast was ready after the weather had already happened. Then came ENIAC, one of the first programmable computers. In 1950, meteorologist John von Neumann fed weather data into this room-sized calculator and watched it produce forecasts in minutes instead of days. The predictions weren't perfect, but they were fast. Really fast. Military planners caught on quickly. Nuclear weapons testing required incredibly precise calculations about fallout patterns and blast effects. Human mathematicians could spend months working out the numbers for a single test scenario. Computers could run hundreds of different scenarios in a single afternoon. Suddenly, predicting the unthinkable became routine office work. The weird part is how expensive computer time was back then. Renting an hour on a mainframe computer cost more than most people earned in a month. Universities and government agencies had to book computer time weeks in advance, like reserving a table at the world's most exclusive restaurant. Scientists would stay up all night feeding punch cards into these machines, knowing that one small error meant starting over and losing thousands of dollars. Wall Street noticed the potential too. Stock traders began experimenting with computer models to predict market movements. Early attempts were laughably simple by today's standards. Basic trend analysis that any high school student could program on a smartphone now. But in 1960, Having a computer calculate moving averages and momentum indicators felt like cheating. Insurance companies jumped in next. Life expectancy tables that once took actuaries months to compile could now be updated in hours. Companies could adjust policies based on new data almost immediately. The business of betting on human mortality became a high-speed numbers game. Scientists made some hilariously wrong predictions about computers themselves during this era. In 1943, IBM's president famously declared there might be a world market for maybe 5 computers total. By 1965, experts were confidently predicting that computers would never be smaller than refrigerators or cost less than luxury cars. These same machines that were supposed to predict everything else completely failed to predict their own future. The real breakthrough came with simulation models. Instead of just calculating single answers, computers could run thousands of what-if scenarios. Climate researchers fed decades of weather data into early models and watched virtual storms develop on primitive screens. Nuclear physicists simulated explosions without actually blowing anything up. Economists created artificial markets where they could crash economies and rebuild them overnight. But here's where things got interesting, and a little scary. These early computer predictions started influencing the very things they were trying to predict. When a computer model suggested that a particular stock would rise, traders would buy that stock, making the prediction come true. Weather forecasts that predicted severe storms caused people to change their travel plans, which changed traffic patterns, which affected everything from gas prices to hotel bookings. NASA pushed computer prediction to its limits during the space race. Landing on the moon required calculating trajectories across 240,000 miles of empty space, accounting for Earth's rotation, the moon's orbit, and the gravitational pull of both planets. One small error in the math meant astronauts would miss the moon entirely and drift into deep space. Computers didn't just make the moon landing possible, they made it predictable. By 1970, computers had become essential tools for anyone serious about prediction. Weather services, military planners, stock traders, and scientists all depended on these room-sized calculators. The machines were still expensive, still temperamental, and still required teams of specialists to operate. But they had proven something important. The future might be uncertain, but it wasn't completely random. The most surprising thing about early computer predictions wasn't how often they were wrong, it was how often they were almost right. A weather forecast that missed by just a few degrees or a few hours was still incredibly useful. Stock market models that were correct 55% of the time could make fortunes. Even crude simulations helped scientists understand complex systems better than pure guesswork. These early computers laid the groundwork for something much bigger. Scientists were already talking about models that could predict climate changes decades into the future, track diseases across continents, and maybe even forecast social and political trends. The machines were getting smaller, faster, and smarter every year. The question wasn't whether computers would revolutionize prediction, that was already happening. The question was how far into the future these electronic crystal balls could actually see. Climate change predictions didn't start with today's heated debates. They began in the 1960s when scientists first realized they could use computers to peek decades into the future. Back then, most weather forecasts barely worked for 3 days ahead. But a few bold researchers wondered, what if we could predict climate 50 years out? The first climate models were massive beasts. These early computer programs filled entire rooms and cost more per hour than most people's yearly salaries. Scientists fed them basic data about temperature, ocean currents, and atmospheric pressure. The computers churned through calculations that would have taken human mathematicians centuries to complete. What came out surprised everyone. Early results showed Earth's temperature rising steadily if carbon dioxide levels kept climbing. This was 1967. Most people had never heard of global warming. Scientists themselves argued fiercely about whether the predictions made sense. Some thought the models were too simple. Others worried they were missing crucial factors like cloud behavior or ocean circulation patterns. Then there's the uncomfortable truth. These primitive models got a lot right. By the 1970s, several research teams independently reached similar conclusions. Earth was warming. Human activity was the main cause. The effects would accelerate over decades, not centuries. Politicians largely ignored these warnings, but scientists kept refining their crystal balls. The difference between weather and climate prediction became crucial here. Weather forecasting looks at specific conditions for specific days. Climate modeling examines broad patterns over years or decades. It's like predicting that summer will be warmer than winter versus predicting whether next Tuesday will hit 75 degrees. One is much easier than the other. Computer power exploded through the 1980s and 1990s. Climate models became more sophisticated, incorporating everything from ice sheet behavior to plant growth cycles. Scientists could simulate how forests would respond to changing rainfall patterns. They modeled how melting polar ice would affect ocean levels worldwide. The predictions grew more detailed and more alarming. But here's where things get weird. Even as the models improved dramatically, public belief in climate predictions actually decreased in many places. Better science somehow created more skepticism. Part of this happened because long-term predictions feel abstract. When someone says Florida's coastline will change in 2080, that feels less urgent than tomorrow's thunderstorm warning. The models also revealed uncomfortable complexities. Climate change wouldn't affect everywhere equally. Some regions might actually get cooler or wetter, while the global average temperature climbed. Arctic areas would warm much faster than tropical zones. These nuanced predictions were harder to communicate than simple "the planet is heating up" messages. Let's not forget the butterfly effect problem. Small changes in initial conditions could produce vastly different outcomes decades later. A slight shift in how models handled cloud formation could change sea level projections by several feet. Scientists learned to run thousands of simulations with slightly different starting points, then average the results. This approach worked better, but created huge ranges of uncertainty. Modern climate models now incorporate feedback loops that early versions missed entirely. As Arctic ice melts, darker ocean water absorbs more heat, causing more melting. As permafrost thaws, it releases methane, which traps even more heat than carbon dioxide. These cascading effects make long-term predictions both more accurate and more frightening. The computing power behind today's climate models is staggering. Supercomputers process millions of data points from satellites, weather stations, ocean buoys, and atmospheric sensors. They simulate how every square kilometer of Earth's surface will respond to changing conditions. Some models can predict regional climate patterns century by century until the year 2300. Accuracy has improved remarkably. Predictions made in the 1970s about temperature changes by 2000 turned out largely correct. Models from the 1990s successfully forecast the accelerating pace of Arctic ice loss. Ocean acidification predictions from early 2000s models match current measurements almost perfectly. The science works even if the politics around it remains messy. Then there's the prediction paradox. The more accurate climate forecasts become, the more they reveal how much we still don't know. Will the Amazon rainforest reach a tipping point where it suddenly releases massive amounts of stored carbon? How quickly will major ice sheets collapse? These questions push even the best models to their limits. Regional predictions remain especially tricky. Global temperature trends are easier to forecast than specific impacts on individual cities or countries. A model might accurately predict worldwide precipitation changes while missing how those changes will affect rainfall in Kansas or flooding in Bangladesh. Local weather patterns add layers of complexity that even supercomputers struggle to untangle. The strangest part: climate scientists now make predictions they desperately hope will prove wrong. Unlike ancient oracles who gained power from mysterious prophecies, modern climate researchers would celebrate if their dire forecasts failed to materialize. They're essentially warning humanity about a slow-motion disaster unfolding over decades. While climate scientists peer decades into the future, other researchers focus on much faster-moving threats that could upend society in months rather than years. Throughout history, humans have faced invisible enemies that could wipe out entire cities. Plagues, fevers, and mysterious diseases struck without warning, leaving people desperate to predict when the next outbreak would arrive. Ancient civilizations had no clue about germs or viruses, but they still tried to spot patterns that might save lives. Early disease prediction was mostly guesswork mixed with superstition. Medieval Europeans blamed bad air, called miasma, for spreading illness. They thought certain seasons, weather patterns, or even the position of planets could trigger epidemics. While their theories were wrong, they were onto something important. Diseases did follow patterns. The Black Death of the 1300s taught people that trade routes spread sickness faster than anything else. Merchants and travelers became unwitting disease carriers, moving plague from city to city along predictable paths. Smart officials began watching for sick travelers and closing borders when reports of distant outbreaks reached their ears. But real progress in disease prediction didn't happen until doctors started keeping detailed records. In 1854, London physician John Snow mapped cholera cases and discovered they clustered around a single water pump. His detective work proved that diseases could be tracked, mapped, and potentially stopped before they spread. This was revolutionary thinking. The 1918 flu pandemic changed everything about how we think about disease prediction. This wasn't just any flu, it killed more people than World War I. Somewhere between 50 and 100 million victims worldwide. What made it terrifying was its speed and unpredictability. Healthy young adults died within days, while some elderly people survived just fine. Here's where things get interesting. The 1918 flu taught scientists that pandemics come in waves. The first wave in spring 1918 was relatively mild. People thought the worst was over. Then came the deadly second wave in fall 1918, followed by a third wave in early 1919. This pattern became a blueprint for understanding how future pandemics might unfold. Modern disease prediction really took off with the invention of computers and global communication networks. By the 1960s, the World Health Organization was collecting disease reports from around the world, creating the first truly global disease surveillance system. Suddenly, a strange fever in rural Africa could be on scientists' radar within hours instead of months. Animal disease patterns became crucial clues for predicting human outbreaks. Many deadly diseases jumped from animals to humans, a process scientists call spillover. Researchers started monitoring wildlife populations, looking for unusual die-offs or strange behaviors that might signal the next pandemic threat. Bats, birds, and pigs became some of the most watched animals on Earth. The SARS outbreak of 2003 was a wake-up call that showed both the power and limits of modern disease prediction. Scientists traced SARS back to bats through civet cats to humans in Chinese markets. They used genetic sequencing to track how the virus changed as it spread from person to person. Computer models predicted which cities were most at risk based on airline travel patterns. But SARS also revealed how quickly modern diseases could spread. A sick businessman could board a plane in Hong Kong and seed outbreaks in Toronto, Singapore, and Vietnam before anyone knew he was contagious. The world had become too connected for old-fashioned quarantine methods to work perfectly. COVID-19 became the ultimate test of everything we'd learned about disease prediction. Scientists had been warning for years that a coronavirus pandemic was inevitable. They'd studied SARS and MERS, mapped bat populations, and even run computer simulations of global pandemic spread. Yet when COVID-19 arrived, it still caught the world largely unprepared. The pandemic revealed both amazing advances and frustrating limitations in disease prediction. Scientists decoded the COVID-19 genome in weeks, not years. They tracked variants as they emerged, predicted which ones might become dominant, and adjusted vaccines accordingly. Computer models helped governments decide when to lock down and when to reopen. Yet COVID-19 also showed that human behavior is the wild card in disease prediction. People don't always follow public health advice. They travel when told to stay home, gather when told to isolate, and sometimes reject vaccines even when scientists predict dire consequences. The virus itself was predictable in many ways, but human responses were not. Today's disease prediction systems are more sophisticated than ever. Scientists monitor sewage for viral fragments that can predict outbreaks before people get sick. Satellite imagery tracks animal migrations that might bring diseases to new areas. Artificial intelligence analyzes millions of social media posts, looking for early reports of unusual symptoms. The next frontier in disease prediction involves something even more complex than viruses. Understanding human behavior, social networks, and cultural factors that influence how diseases spread is becoming just as important as understanding the pathogens themselves. Because in the end, diseases don't just follow biological rules, they follow human ones too. What happens when prediction systems become so advanced that they can spot threats before they even fully emerge? That's where technology is taking us next. Wall Street in the 1980s was a very different place. Traders screamed across crowded floors, waving pieces of paper and making deals based on gut feelings and phone calls. Then computers arrived, and everything changed forever. The first stock market algorithms weren't particularly smart. They followed simple rules like sell when the price drops 5% or buy more of whatever went up yesterday. But even these basic programs could process information faster than any human trader. While a person might take minutes to calculate whether a stock was worth buying, computers made the same decision in seconds. By the late 1980s, something strange started happening. Computers weren't just helping traders anymore, they were replacing them. Program trading, as it was called back then, began making thousands of decisions every hour. The machines never got tired, never panicked, and never took lunch breaks. Then came October 19th, 1987. Black Monday hit the markets like a sledgehammer. The Dow Jones dropped over 22% in a single day, the largest one-day percentage decline in stock market history. What made it worse? Many blamed the computers. When prices started falling, the algorithms all did exactly what they were programmed to do: sell everything fast. The crash taught Wall Street an important lesson, but not the one you might expect. Instead of backing away from computer trading, firms doubled down. They just wanted smarter algorithms. Enter the quants. These were mathematicians and physicists who treated the stock market like a giant physics problem. They built models that could spot patterns humans never noticed. Some algorithms watched for tiny price differences between the same stock trading in different cities. Others predicted how earnings reports would affect stock prices based on the language used in press releases. The real revolution came with high-frequency trading in the 2000s. These algorithms didn't just trade fast, they traded at the speed of light, literally. Companies spent millions of dollars to build fiber optic cables that could shave microseconds off trade times. A microsecond is 1/1,000,000th of a second. But in algorithmic trading, that tiny advantage meant millions in profits. Here's where it gets weird. Some trading firms bought buildings as close as possible to stock exchanges. Why? Because even the speed of electricity traveling through cables mattered. The closer you were, the faster your trades could reach the market. Companies paid tens of millions for warehouse space in New Jersey just to be a few miles closer to the New York Stock Exchange. But the algorithms weren't content to just trade faster than humans. They started trying to predict what humans would do before humans knew they wanted to do it. Machine learning programs analyzed everything: news headlines, social media posts, satellite images of parking lots outside major retailers, even the weather. If it could affect stock prices, algorithms were watching it. The results were both impressive and terrifying. Some hedge funds using algorithmic trading posted returns that seemed almost impossible. They were making money whether markets went up or down, finding profit opportunities in places humans had never thought to look. Then came May 6, 2010. The flash crash lasted only 36 minutes, but it showed everyone just how powerful these prediction machines had become. The Dow dropped nearly 1,000 points in minutes, then bounced back almost as quickly. Individual stocks went haywire. Procter & Gamble shares briefly fell from $62 to $39 for no apparent reason. What happened? Algorithms started talking to each other in a language humans couldn't follow. One program's selling triggered another program's selling, which triggered another program's selling. The machines created their own panic, buying and selling billions of dollars worth of stock based on predictions that lasted mere seconds. The scary part wasn't just the speed, it was that nobody really understood why it happened. The algorithms had evolved beyond their creators' full understanding. They were making predictions and decisions using logic that even their programmers couldn't completely explain. Today's trading algorithms make the flash crash systems look like pocket calculators. They process news articles in dozens of languages, analyze satellite footage of oil refineries, and even study facial expressions of CEOs during television interviews. Some algorithms predict market movements by tracking the mood of Twitter posts or counting the number of times certain words appear in financial news. Yet for all their sophistication, these systems still can't consistently beat the market over long periods. The stock market remains stubbornly unpredictable, even for machines that can process information at superhuman speeds. Every time algorithms get better at finding patterns, the market seems to develop new ways to surprise them. The strangest twist: many of the most successful hedge funds are now hiring anthropologists and psychologists alongside their mathematicians. They've realized that predicting markets isn't just about crunching numbers, it's about understanding the messy, illogical ways humans think and feel about money. But computers weren't just revolutionizing financial predictions, they were about to transform how we predict something that affects everyone, every single day. Weather apps have become the oracle of our time. You check your phone before leaving the house, planning your weekend, or deciding whether to carry an umbrella. But here's what most people don't realize. Behind that simple 5-day forecast sits one of the most complex prediction systems humanity has ever built. Modern weather prediction starts 22,000 miles above your head. A constellation of satellites circles Earth every day, watching storms brew over oceans and tracking temperature changes across continents. These aren't just taking pretty pictures for the evening news. They're measuring wind speeds, humidity levels, atmospheric pressure, and dozens of other variables every few minutes. The European Space Agency's satellites alone collect over 40 million observations daily. Then there's the ground game. Weather stations scattered across the planet, from automated buoys floating in the Pacific to sensors buried in Antarctic ice, send constant streams of data. Ships at sea report conditions. Commercial aircraft automatically transmit atmospheric readings during flights. Even your local airport contributes crucial information to the global weather network. All this data flows into supercomputers that would make early NASA engineers weep with joy. The European Centre for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts processes over 1 billion observations every single day. Their main computer can perform 8.5 quadrillion calculations per second. That's roughly equivalent to every person on Earth doing 1.1 million math problems simultaneously. But raw computing power means nothing without the right mathematical models. Weather prediction relies on equations that describe how air moves, how heat transfers, and how moisture behaves in the atmosphere. These models divide the entire planet into a three-dimensional grid. Imagine Earth wrapped in invisible boxes, each about 10 kilometers wide and stretching from the ground to the edge of space. The computer calculates what happens in every single box, then figures out how changes in one box affect all the neighboring boxes. The process repeats thousands of times to simulate how weather will evolve hour by hour, day by day. Your Tuesday morning forecast started as Monday's atmospheric conditions, then got fast-forwarded through millions of mathematical calculations to predict where storms will be, how strong winds will blow, and whether rain clouds will form over your neighborhood. Weather apps make this complexity look effortless. You tap an icon and get hourly predictions, radar maps, and warnings about incoming storms. Some apps claim accuracy down to your exact street address. They'll tell you it starts raining at 2:47 p.m. and stops at 4:15 p.m. The confidence behind these predictions would make ancient Roman augurs jealous. Yet meteorologists still get things wrong. Spectacular wrong sometimes. Remember when the weather app promised sunny skies for your outdoor wedding? Then a surprise thunderstorm soaked everything. The atmosphere loves throwing curveballs that even billion-dollar prediction systems miss. The problem isn't stupidity or laziness, it's chaos theory in action. Small changes in initial conditions can completely alter weather patterns days later. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil really might affect tornado formation in Texas, though probably not in the poetic way most people imagine. More realistically, a temperature reading that's off by half a degree, or a missed measurement of wind speed over the ocean, can snowball into forecast errors that ruin picnics hundreds of miles away. Weather prediction accuracy has improved dramatically though. 5-day forecasts today are roughly as accurate as 3-day forecasts were in the 1980s. Modern hurricane track predictions give coastal residents much more warning time than previous generations had. The National Weather Service estimates that better forecasts save the American economy about $109 billion annually, by helping people make smarter decisions about travel, farming, construction, and emergency preparation. Some predictions work better than others. Temperature forecasts are generally more reliable than precipitation forecasts. Predicting whether it will rain is harder than predicting how warm it will be. Storm timing remains especially tricky. That 2:47 p.m. rain start time is more wishful thinking than scientific precision. Different weather services use different models and make different assumptions, which explains why your phone's weather app sometimes disagrees with the local TV meteorologist. European models excel at long-range forecasting. American models often perform better for short-term predictions. Some apps blend multiple forecasts together, hoping that averaging different approaches reduces overall error. The real revolution isn't just better accuracy, it's democratized access to sophisticated predictions. Your smartphone weather app uses the same satellite data and computer models that governments spent billions developing. Anyone can access detailed forecasts, storm tracking, and severe weather warnings instantly. But even as weather prediction reaches new heights of sophistication, technology companies are pushing prediction into entirely new territories. While satellites watch storms form over distant oceans, artificial intelligence systems are learning to predict human behavior, market trends, and social patterns with unsettling accuracy. The same drive to see tomorrow that puts weather apps on every phone is creating prediction tools that make meteorology look simple by comparison. Artificial intelligence arrived quietly at first, then suddenly exploded into the prediction game like a mathematical tornado. While humans spent centuries squinting at bird flights and poking through sheep livers, machines began processing billions of data points faster than you could blink. The real kicker: they started finding patterns nobody saw coming. Machine learning algorithms don't care about your grandfather's weather wisdom or ancient star charts. They devour massive datasets and spot connections that would take human experts lifetimes to notice. Take disease prediction, for instance. Traditional epidemiologists might track seasonal flu patterns or monitor hospital reports from a few dozen cities. AI systems, they simultaneously analyze millions of social media posts, pharmacy purchases, search queries, travel patterns and temperature readings across entire continents. When people start Googling sore throat remedies in unusual numbers, the algorithm notices before the first doctor does. Google's flu prediction system famously tracked search terms to predict outbreaks weeks ahead of official health reports. Sure, it stumbled sometimes. Turns out people also search for flu symptoms when they're just paranoid about getting sick. But the concept revolutionized how we think about early warning systems. Then there's natural disaster prediction, where AI really flexes its computational muscles. Earthquake forecasting used to rely on seismologists studying fault lines and historical patterns. Now machine learning models process satellite imagery, ground sensor data, animal behavior reports, and even underwater sound recordings to spot precursor signals human experts might miss. The 2011 Japanese tsunami caught many off guard, but modern AI systems are trained on that exact scenario to recognize similar warning signs faster than any human could. Facebook knows what you'll click before you do. Their prediction algorithms analyze your past behavior, your friends' activities, the time of day, your location, and thousands of other variables to guess which posts will grab your attention. The weird part: they're right about 80% of the time. That's better than most people know themselves. Google's search suggestions work the same way, autocomplete predictions based on millions of similar queries. Type "why does my," and it already knows you're probably asking about your cat, your car, or your relationship. The algorithm has seen this pattern millions of times before. Financial markets became AI playgrounds decades ago. High-frequency trading algorithms make thousands of buy-sell decisions per second, predicting tiny price movements based on news sentiment, trading volumes and market patterns. These systems process information so fast they can react to breaking news before human traders finish reading the headline. The 2010 flash crash happened partly because competing algorithms created a feedback loop, triggering massive sell-offs in minutes. But here's where things get genuinely strange. Modern AI systems often make accurate predictions without anyone understanding why. Deep learning neural networks, the fancy math behind modern AI, work like digital black boxes. Data goes in, predictions come out, but the middle part remains mysterious even to the programmers who built them. An AI might correctly predict which patients will develop complications after surgery, but doctors can't explain the reasoning behind each decision. This creates fascinating problems. Should hospitals trust AI recommendations they can't fully understand? What happens when these systems are wrong? Traditional fortune tellers faced angry customers. Modern AI failures can affect millions of people simultaneously. Netflix's recommendation system represents AI prediction at its most personal. The algorithm tracks what you watch when you pause, what you skip, and even which thumbnail images make you click. It knows you prefer crime documentaries on Sunday mornings and romantic comedies on Friday nights, often suggesting shows you didn't know existed but somehow perfectly match your mood. Amazon's predictive shipping pushes this concept further. Their system sometimes ships products to warehouses near you before you've even decided to buy them. They're literally predicting your future purchases based on browsing history and seasonal patterns. Weather forecasting got a massive AI boost too. Traditional meteorologists combine atmospheric physics with computer models, but AI systems now help process satellite data, recognize cloud patterns, and adjust forecasts based on real-time observations from millions of sources. Your weather app might seem simple, but behind the scenes, machine learning algorithms are constantly refining predictions based on how well previous forecasts matched actual conditions. The creepy factor kicks in when AI starts predicting things about you that you haven't told it. Target's algorithm famously identified pregnant customers based on their purchasing patterns, buying unscented lotion and certain vitamins, sometimes before the women had announced their pregnancies to family. The system correctly predicted something deeply personal using nothing but shopping data. Scientists worry about AI predictions becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. When algorithms predict someone might commit a crime or default on a loan, those predictions can influence human decisions in ways that make the original prediction more likely to come true. Yet, for all their computational power, AI systems still can't predict the truly unexpected events that reshape our world. They excel at finding patterns in existing data, but genuine surprises, the kind that change everything, often come from completely new directions. Which raises an intriguing question about what happens when these incredibly sophisticated prediction tools become part of everyone's daily routine, influencing the smallest decisions we make. Your smartphone already knows more about your future than you might realize. It tracks your sleep patterns, counts your steps, monitors your heart rate, and quietly builds a profile of what tomorrow might hold for your health. Welcome to the age of personal prediction, where algorithms don't just guess what movie you'll like, they're trying to figure out if you'll get diabetes. DNA testing companies like 23andMe can scan your genetic code and tell you whether you're likely to develop Alzheimer's, heart disease, or even baldness. For less than $200, you get a glimpse into health risks that would have been impossible to predict just decades ago. The weird part is how casual we've become about this. People spit into a tube, mail it off, and casually discuss their genetic predispositions over dinner. But genetic predictions come with a catch. Having the gene for something doesn't guarantee you'll get it. Your lifestyle, environment, and pure luck all play roles that DNA can't predict. Some people carry genetic markers for diseases they never develop, while others get sick despite having good genes. It's like having a weather forecast that only considers yesterday's temperature. Fitness apps have gotten scary good at predicting your next workout. They know when you usually exercise, how hard you push yourself, and even when you're likely to skip a day. Strava can predict if you'll beat your personal record before you even lace up your running shoes. Apple Watch sends notifications suggesting you stand up or breathe deeply, often at exactly the moment you need it most. Then there's the creepy stuff. Your phone's health app might notice irregular heart rhythms before you feel any symptoms. Some devices can detect early signs of illness by monitoring subtle changes in your voice, walking patterns, or sleep quality. People have discovered serious health conditions because their smartwatch noticed something was off. Dating apps use prediction algorithms that would make ancient fortune tellers jealous. They analyze your swipes, messages, and even the time you spend looking at photos to predict who you'll find attractive. Tinder's algorithm learns your type better than you know it yourself. Some apps claim they can predict relationship success based on communication patterns and shared interests. Social media platforms have turned personal prediction into an art form. Facebook knows when you're likely to make a major life change before you announce it. Instagram can predict when you're traveling, getting married, or having a baby based on the photos you like and the accounts you follow. Google probably knows you're pregnant before you tell your family, thanks to your search history and location data. Smart home devices are constantly making tiny predictions about your daily routine. Your thermostat learns when you come home and adjusts the temperature accordingly. Smart lights dim automatically when your fitness tracker says you're winding down for bed. Even your coffee maker can predict when you'll want that first cup in the morning. Financial apps now offer personalized predictions about your spending habits and savings goals. They analyze your transaction history to warn you when you're about to overspend or suggest how much you should save for vacation. Some apps can predict which bills you'll have trouble paying before you even receive them. The privacy debate around personal prediction gets messier every year. Companies argue they need your data to provide better services, while privacy advocates worry about how this information could be misused. Insurance companies would love to use your fitness data to adjust your premiums. Employers might want to predict which workers will get sick or quit. Most people seem surprisingly comfortable trading privacy for convenience. We let apps track our location, monitor our purchases, and analyze our communication patterns in exchange for personalized recommendations and predictions. The question isn't whether we should share this data, we're already sharing it. The question is what companies do with it. Personal prediction has created a feedback loop that changes behavior. When your phone predicts you'll be stressed based on your calendar, you might actually feel more anxious. When a health app says you're at risk for a disease, it might motivate healthier choices or create unnecessary worry. Predictions don't just forecast the future, they help create it. The accuracy of personal predictions varies wildly depending on what's being predicted. Short-term predictions like traffic delays or weather are pretty reliable. Medium-term predictions about health risks or financial trends are hit or miss. Long-term predictions about career success or relationship outcomes are barely better than guessing. Young people have grown up with personalized predictions as a normal part of life. They expect their devices to know what they want before they ask. Older generations are still adjusting to algorithms that suggest everything from what to eat for breakfast to whom they should marry. But even with all this technology, humans remain fundamentally unpredictable. We make impulsive decisions, change our minds, and surprise ourselves regularly. The most sophisticated personal prediction systems still struggle with the basic chaos of human nature. As impressive as personal prediction has become, it's bumping up against some hard limits that reveal just how mysterious the future really remains. After thousands of years of trying to crack the code of tomorrow, you'd think we'd have it figured out by now. Ancient shamans studied bird flights, Romans examined sheep livers, and today we have supercomputers processing billions of data points every second. Yet somehow the future keeps throwing curveballs that leave even our smartest predictions looking ridiculous. Take the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite all our disease modeling, global surveillance networks, and decades of pandemic planning, most governments were caught completely off guard. The virus didn't follow the neat patterns our models expected. It spread faster than predicted in some places, slower in others. People's behaviors changed in ways no algorithm anticipated. Suddenly all those confident epidemiological forecasts seemed as useful as reading tea leaves. The financial world knows this pain intimately. Wall Street employs armies of quantitative analysts armed with sophisticated mathematical models. These quants crunch historical data, market sentiment, and economic indicators to predict stock movements. Their computers can execute thousands of trades per second based on predictive algorithms. But then 2008 happened. The housing market collapsed in ways their models said were virtually impossible. Mortgage-backed securities, rated as safe investments by prediction models, became worthless overnight. The Black Swan event revealed how even the most advanced forecasting could miss the obvious. Weather prediction offers another humbling example. Modern meteorology is genuinely impressive. We can track hurricanes across oceans and predict their paths days in advance. Satellite imagery, atmospheric modeling, and supercomputer simulations have transformed forecasting from folklore into legitimate science. Yet anyone who's been caught in an unexpected downpour knows the limits. The atmosphere is what scientists call a chaotic system. Tiny changes in one place can create massive effects elsewhere. That butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil really might influence weather patterns in Texas weeks later. Human psychology adds another layer of unpredictability. People don't behave like mathematical equations. During the 2016 Brexit vote, most polls and prediction models showed Remain would win easily. Political scientists had historical voting patterns, demographic data, and sophisticated sampling techniques. They missed something crucial: how people actually felt when they entered the voting booth. Emotions, last-minute decisions, and social pressures created results that defied the data. Then there's the problem of technological disruption. In 1995, even tech experts struggled to predict how the internet would reshape society. Many saw it as a fancy communication tool for academics and computer hobbyists. Few anticipated online shopping, social media, or smartphone apps dominating daily life. The prediction industry itself got blindsided by its own tools. What makes these failures particularly interesting is how confident the predictors often sound beforehand. Economic forecasters present their analyses with decimal point precision. Political pollsters cite margin of error statistics. Climate scientists build elaborate models spanning decades. The mathematical sophistication creates an illusion of certainty that reality rarely delivers. But here's where things get really strange. Even knowing about these limitations, we keep building more complex prediction systems. Artificial intelligence now analyzes patterns humans can't even see. Machine learning algorithms process social media posts, satellite imagery, and sensor data to forecast everything from crop yields to consumer behavior. These systems sometimes work brilliantly, and sometimes fail spectacularly for reasons their creators can't explain. The weirdest part might be how prediction failures often create new opportunities. The 2008 financial crisis led to better risk management systems. Pandemic modeling improved dramatically after COVID-19. Failed weather forecasts drive innovations in atmospheric science. Each spectacular failure teaches us something about the limits of prediction itself. Consider how human free will complicates everything. If everyone believes a recession is coming, they might change their spending habits enough to actually cause one. If weather forecasts predict a major storm, people evacuate, changing the very outcomes the predictions were trying to anticipate. The act of predicting can alter what gets predicted. Some philosophers argue this is actually the point. Maybe perfect prediction would be a curse rather than a blessing. If we knew exactly what would happen tomorrow, would we lose motivation to try changing anything? Would innovation stop? Would life become boring? The financial markets provide a perfect example of this paradox. If everyone could predict stock prices perfectly, trading would become impossible. The very existence of profitable prediction destroys the conditions that made it possible in the first place. Modern prediction systems also face the problem of information overload. We collect more data than ever before, but distinguishing meaningful signals from background noise becomes increasingly difficult. Having too much information can sometimes make predictions worse, not better. Yet, despite all these limitations, one thing remains constant across every culture and era: our stubborn refusal to give up trying. Each failed prediction leads to new theories, better methods, and more sophisticated tools. The quest continues, driven by something deeper than scientific curiosity. After thousands of years of trying to peek behind tomorrow's curtain, you'd think we might have given up by now. Failed oracle bones, wrong weather predictions, crashed stock markets, missed pandemics. The track record isn't exactly stellar, yet here we are, still desperately wanting to know what happens next. Walk into any bookstore, and you'll find shelves packed with future predictions. Scroll through your phone and apps are guessing your next move before you even know it yourself. Turn on the news and experts are forecasting everything from election results to the end of civilization. We're absolutely obsessed with tomorrow, even when yesterday's predictions fell flat on their face. But why do we keep trying when we're so spectacularly bad at it? The answer isn't complicated. Uncertainty feels terrible, always has. Those ancient shamans throwing bones weren't really trying to nail the exact date of the next flood. They were trying to help their tribe sleep better at night. Same reason people check their horoscope over morning coffee or refresh weather apps 16 times before leaving the house. We want control, even if it's just the illusion of control. Then there's the fascinating fact that being wrong doesn't seem to matter much. Remember all those Y2K predictions about computers destroying civilization? Completely wrong. But that didn't stop people from making bold predictions about the 2008 financial crisis, or climate change, or artificial intelligence taking over the world. We have incredibly short memories when it comes to prediction failures. And here's the weird part: sometimes we actually get things right. Not often, but enough to keep the game interesting. Scientists did predict that smoking causes cancer decades before everyone accepted it. Economists did warn about housing bubbles before they burst. Weather forecasters do get tomorrow's rain right most of the time. These victories, rare as they are, fuel our confidence that maybe, just maybe, we're getting better at this whole prediction thing. Technology keeps feeding this hope too. Every new invention promises to finally crack the code of the future. Ancient Babylonians thought better star charts would do it. Medieval Europeans believed more detailed omen catalogues were the answer. Today we're convinced that artificial intelligence and big data will solve the puzzle. Each generation thinks they're the ones who will finally figure it out. The truth is, we're probably not that much better at prediction than our ancestors were. We just have fancier tools and more data to be wrong with. A Roman augur watching birds might have been just as accurate as a modern political pollster watching social media trends. Both are looking for patterns in chaos, hoping those patterns mean something. Let's not forget that predictions serve purposes beyond accuracy. They start conversations, shape decisions, and sometimes become self-fulfilling prophecies. When economists predict a recession, people might start saving money and spending less, which could actually help cause the recession they predicted. Weather warnings make people stay home, preventing accidents that might have happened. Even wrong predictions can influence reality in useful ways. There's also something deeply human about trying to see around corners. Every culture in history developed prediction methods, usually independently. Chinese oracle bones, Greek oracles, Roman birdwatching, Mayan calendars, they all emerged from the same basic human need, to feel less helpless against an uncertain future. That suggests prediction isn't just cultural habit, it might be hardwired into who we are. Modern life actually makes this need stronger, not weaker. We have more choices than ever before, more information to process, more possible futures to worry about. Your ancestors might have wondered if it would rain tomorrow. You wonder about career changes, relationship decisions, investment choices, health risks, climate change, and whether that weird noise your car is making means expensive repairs. The complexity of modern life creates more uncertainty, not less. The internet amplifies everything too. Now we don't just get predictions from local experts or trusted authorities, we get them from algorithms, strangers on social media, and AI systems we don't understand. Everyone's a predictor, and everyone's predictions reach everyone else instantly. The noise is overwhelming, but we keep listening anyway. Maybe that's the real point. Prediction isn't really about being right. It's about feeling like we're doing something productive with our anxiety about the unknown. It's about turning helpless worry into purposeful action, even if that action is just checking one more forecast or reading one more expert opinion. Will we ever stop trying to predict the future? Probably not. As long as humans face uncertainty, we'll keep reaching for whatever tools promise to light up the darkness ahead. We'll probably keep being wrong most of the time too. But every generation will think they've finally cracked the code, just like every generation before them thought the same thing. The methods change, the confidence remains, and the future keeps surprising us all.